Hello everyone, welcome to our audiobook channel. If you enjoy this story or want to hear more exciting content, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Your feedback helps us improve and bring even more captivating stories. Enjoy listening. Chapter 1, The Man Who Conquered All. Smirking maliciously, Draco held the orb of worlds in his hand, twirling it lazily while looking down on the woman at the foot of his golden throne. So, this is all you amount to? After years of competition between our top guilds, Darkrow Guild falls to my Hellscape Guild. Adding to that is this lovely gift you've given me. With this, our rule in Boundless is secured and all the AAA companies will clamor at our feet. He bent down slightly, putting his arrogant yet handsome face closer to the black-clad woman in tight leathers kneeling at his feet, although her face was obscured by shadows and darkness. She was none other than Riveting Knight, leader of the Darkrow Guild. Despite being on the losing end, she was conspicuously silent, only staring right at Draco. Frowning, Draco felt something was off. No matter how mature and calm a person was, having your empire that you built from scraps crumble at the hands of your hated enemy would elicit some form of response. The lack of such a response from Riveting Knight made Draco alarmed. In fact, his long-held paranoia made him imagine a smirk on the lips on her face, although such a thing couldn't be seen. Without wasting any more time gloating, he executed her using his mana sword, a unique weapon he created himself that had been recognized globally as Boundless #1 weapon. The game had seen a massive explosion in value and publicity in the 15 years it had been out, becoming more than just a second world. In fact, some may argue that Boundless was the real world while Earth was the second, but those people were delusional in Draco's opinion. He had started from the utmost bottom position, barely scraping by in college while playing as a Harvey, a derogatory term for a guild's resource harvester. The guild he had slaved for was none other than Darkrow, back in the early days. He had climbed from a measly Harvey to an elite member due to his insane skills, essentially becoming the first vice guild leader out of 2 in just 5 years. After that, he was recognized as one of the game's best players in the global ranking, taking the 3rd spot. Unfortunately, the 2 above him existed in different locations that were light years away from his base of operations, so he never had a chance to thrash them. At that time, the guild leader, Riveting Knight, had noticed him and they entered into a relationship. Those fulfilling days of Draco's were shattered when he found out she was sleeping with Local Lord, the other vice guild leader. He then left Darkrow and swore to crush them into oblivion for this betrayal, creating Hellscape and raising it to legendary status in 5 years. Then came the brutal conflicts between the 2 guilds which occurred in-game and sometimes out of game. Many elites had been assassinated on both sides, and Draco had even performed a few himself. The world of Boundless was a cruel one, especially when you were at the top. It was the same as being a politician in the real world, your life was always in danger one way or another. Draco gazed at his hands, lost in his thoughts of the past and reconciling with his hatred and thirst for vengeance. With Darkrow officially crushed, it could be considered that his quest was complete, but something felt off. Riveting Knight's behavior had him wary, but he didn't know why. Guild leader, everything has been set up for the ceremony. When will you perform it? Asked one of his vice guild leaders. Forcibly pulled from his thoughts, Draco nodded absent-mindedly. In half an hour's time. I need to go and do something. The other elders and vice guild leaders were puzzled by his sudden listlessness, but knew better than to comment. Their guild leader was far from a benevolent man. Many even describe him as evil. They would admit that they weren't pure themselves, but compared to their guild leader, they were like kittens to a saber-toothed tiger. Draco paid no attention to their questioning glances and decided to log out for now. Going through the usual animation for de-immersion, he climbed out of his gaming cabin groggily. He hadn't logged out in a few months, and despite the cabin's ability to prevent atrophy and keep the body healthy, it still took him some time to adapt to being normal. Moving through his mansion, he crossed over to the upstairs snack bar and took out some chi.p.s. He chewed on them idly while drinking soda, his thoughts scattered across various topics. It was too late when he realized that his enhanced danger sense was tingling. Diving into a roll, he came up behind where he thought his attacker would be only to find nothing. Surprisingly, he felt a hot fluid spreading over his chest area. Did he pour his soda on his body? When he looked down, he was surprised to see that something was sticking out of his chest. It looked like a sword. In real life? Was this a joke? When he touched the fluid, his lethargic brain realized that it was not soda, but blood. Probably his blood, he thought. What baffled him was that there was no pain, just mild surprise. Even when he lost control of his body and fell to the floor, the only thing on his mind was a mild contemplation of the sequence of events. Right before his eyes closed and his consciousness was banished from reality, he suddenly came to a startling conclusion. Ah! I been assassinated, huh? Interesting. Such was the sudden and soon-to-be uproarious death of Draco, the leader of the legendary guild hellscape of Boundless World. But the soul of Draco wasn't concerned with that. Upon death, it moved to enter the reincarnation cycle, aiming to be reborn in the next 200 or so years. Unfortunately, a gigantic hand grabbed his tiny blob of consciousness and threw it at the wheel, but not towards the future segment. His consciousness, his soul, was flung towards the past section, entering the cycle subtly, disappearing from the other world almost imperceptibly. The only being with the awareness of this chaotic action was the owner of the hand, who was laughing happily, excited at the level of carnage his actions would cause. Like a young teenager preparing to watch a superhero movie, he readied himself to watch the show of a lifetime. Chapter 2, Reincarnation of the Strongest Guild Leader. When Draco woke up, he realized that his head was throbbing painfully. Cursing darkly, he got up and checked his surroundings, expecting to see his expensive suite. What he saw instead, was a ramshackle room that looked like it could barely house a family of rats, much less a human being. Blinking with surprise, he looked at his chest sharply. No wounds. Just a scrawny body that looked like it could barely take a punch from a child, which was the opposite of the power-packed form he was used to. Despite this different scene from what he expected, the sense of familiarity did not escape him. He knew this place and he recognized this body. This was his home and himself from 15 years ago, when he was a cowardly young man who could barely afford to feed himself. He picked up his brick phone and checked the time, 7 a.m., 21/03/2065. Despite his calm outward appearance, his mind was reeling from this. This date meant that Boundless would be launching in exactly 5 hours. Shops selling the basic game helmet for the Boundless servers would close in less than 3 hours. His memories of the past, which had been blurry, become crisp and clear. These memories were, after all, fresh and recent in the mind of this body. Yet, he could also remember everything beyond this date as easily as one with perfect eidetic memory would. He remembered that he had painstakingly saved every scrap of money for the 2 years Boundless had been announced and was in closed alpha and beta, starving himself in bursts to gather enough to buy the most basic helmet. Since he had very little time, he decided to follow his past self's actions and purchase the helmet before closure. He walked out of his attic-like bedroom and washed up under his leaky shower, which only shot out icy water. Shrugging the discomfort away was easy for the current Draco, while his old self used to spend 10 minutes alternating parts of his body under the shower in order to get used to it. After cleaning himself, he put on his outgoing shirt and wore some summer shorts and slippers before heading out. Walking along the boulevard, he was forced to look at the filthy surroundings of this underdeveloped area that existed on the outskirts of town. Despite the progression of society in the area of technology, or perhaps, because of it, nothing had really changed. The poor were getting poorer and the richer were getting richer. While Draco wasn't yet at the bottom rung, he wasn't that far off. Thanks to the leftover insurance money from his deceased parents, he could afford to keep off the streets. Even though this part of town was indisputably shitty, there was still some level of patronage, so it didn't take him long to reach a small outlet store with a blue banner stating "Get your FIVR helmets for Boundless here with a basic starters package for $300. Still, he didn't head into the shop, rather waiting for a certain event to occur. In less than 30 seconds, 4 familiar faces emerged from the corner. The moment these fellows locked onto him, they started snickering meanly. The leader of them, an ugly rotund fool by the name of Jarko, walked up to Draco while his man-tits shook the heavens and earth. Well, if it isn't the Draco the Cowardly Dragon. What are you doing here? Coming to donate money to us so we can start our guild? Oh gee golly, how kind of you. The 3 skinny and ugly fools behind him took their cue to snigger. Rolling his eyes, Draco sighed. In the original scene years ago, he had been stammering and shaking, eventually being beaten and extorted. The shopkeeper had taken pity on him and loaned Draco a used helmet that was for beta testers in order to play the game. However, Draco decided to rewrite the script for this scene. In the years to come, he would remember this day as the moment when the god of chaos who threw him into the past had achieved the foundations for his goal. Piss off Jarko, your stink is clogging my nose. What I'm here to do is none of your f.u.c.k.i.n.g business, shitbag. Draco's reply was met with silence. Not even in their wildest dreams did these 4 idiots expect him to retaliate to their provocations. Draco could choose to walk by them and let this matter blow off, but he had a different idea. With a dark smirk, Draco sent his fist flying into the guts of the fat fool before him, which made them all gasp. Talking back was one thing, suddenly attacking was another. Just what had this dude eaten that made him so ballsy? This is for all the times you bullied me, cowdies. However, Tubby didn't fall over in pain. With a surprised grunt, he realized that the fist he thought would hurt him actually did nothing at all. The moment he and his lackeys came to this realization, their previous fear and alarm blew off as they burst into laughter. Draco didn't make any other move, simply smirking coldly while gazing upon them as one would an insect. This act made the bullies cut their laughter as they grew angry at this scrawny fellow's scorn. All right Draco, I'll give it to you, you've finally grown some balls. But clearly, they're far too small to, ugh. Arg. Tubby's words cut off the moment he started talking too much, realizing that every word he spoke brought exponentially increasing pain to his chest and abdomen area. At the current level, he could barely remain standing and fell to the floor, gasping and shrieking in pain which further increased the ferocity. The faces of the mindless fools behind him turned white as a sheet from the sounds their boss was making. This wasn't the normal level of agony, this was advanced torment. He wouldn't sound out of place in a terrorist torture video as a victim right now. Turning to face the other 3, Draco spoke slowly but dangerously. You have 10 seconds to give me every single dollar you have on your body, otherwise you'll end up worse than him. He's only enduring 50% of the pain thanks to his fat body. You skinny fools will have to bear it all. Choose wisely. The countdown starts now. The coward inside them reared its ugly head at this moment, as they clamored over each other to drop every single penny they had on them, including what Jarko possessed. Without wasting a second, they dragged the tub of lard away hurriedly, casting fearful looks at Draco as if he would change his mind and attack them. Scoffing, he entered the outlet store to purchase the helmet, but was met with a surreal scene. The cashier, who was a college girl working part-time, was trembling like she had been shocked with electricity. Draco had a good impression of her since she had been very kind to him in his past life, so seeing her terrified of him made him feel awkward. Sighing, he decided to try and fix things lest it escalate indirectly. Sorry about that. Those boys have been beating me up for the past 2 years and I always took it quietly. Recently, a martial master decided to teach me a few moves, which I used on them, as you saw. If I didn't, well. He let her finish the thought in her mind, and she realized that 4 against 1 would have ended a lot worse than what had just occurred. With that in mind, she regained composure, but still watched him warily. What do you need, sir? I'd like to purchase the boundless helmet, Draco replied with an easygoing smile. Seeing this, she let go of her wariness as her occupational demeanor fully returned. Excellent, sir. That would be $200. Would you like to purchase a package as well? Draco leaned on the counter easily and pretended to be deep in thought. What are the available packages? Well, sir, we have the basic package, which includes 2 potions of the health, mana, and stamina type, a common weapon of each type which can be resold in-game, and a basic kit of the light, medium and heavy categories. This would be $300 just for today. After today, it will move to $1,000. There's the advanced package, which includes everything in the basic package with the inclusion of 3 basic trade skill books that the player can select in-game. There is also the option for a player to choose between basic crafting resources to start off your trade career without having to grind. This is the optimal package for those who want to double as lifestyle players. This package is priced at $500 for today, but will be $1,200 for newcomers after tomorrow. The final package is the Master one. It includes everything in the 2 packages mentioned earlier, as well as some rare resources, 2 rare weapons of your choice, and 3 combat skill books that are uncommon. This package is recommended for veteran players who are looking to build an empire in-game. This package costs $700 and will rise to $1,500 after today. Draco already knew about all this, but he still paid close attention to see if there were any changes. Seeing as they were none, he contemplated his choices. I came here with $200 which should have been taken, but I managed to keep. After beating around those fools, I got an additional $1,700 since they all planned to buy the basic package while the fat idiot was targeting the advanced one. That means I can buy the master package as well as some basic necessities to carry me until I can profit off Boundless. Draco's brain was alive with rapid-fire thoughts, plans being hatched and choices predetermined. Upon reaching a conclusion, he decided to follow the most powerful path, the one that would bring him into opulence long before the date he achieved in his previous life. I'll take the master package and 3 third-grade new smoothies. Here's the money, he said, removing $1,500 and handing it over to the cashier. After processing everything, Draco left the outlet store with his new helmet and 3 small flasks of the precious new smoothies, which were extracted nutrients that were of an optimal balance to increase muscle mass, general fitness, and lifespan. He had only gotten to taste this wonderful elixir after a good 7 years last time round. When Draco entered his bedroom, he didn't immediately tear open the box and jump into the game. After all, it was launching in roughly 4 hours' time. Instead, Draco stripped until he was in his boxers and began a simple strength exercise. Nothing too strenuous, as his muscles were weak and his body malnourished. After barely 5 minutes of optimal training, he hit his limit. Well, it seems like this body is too weak to even finish the set, he thought with a frown. He downed a full flask of the new smoothies immediately to replenish his body's stock and to refresh his aching muscles. Ugh. Arg. He coughed in pain and fell to his knees as what felt like liquid mercury pulsed through his body. I almost forgot how potent new smoothies are at the first consumption. It seems mine was pretty intense since my body is so weak. He managed to climb to his feet after the pain elapsed. The moment he did, he felt the qualitative difference in his breathing and movements. Of course, he hadn't suddenly transformed into an all-star athlete, but he went from a nude chicken to a chicken with plate mail. After that, Draco unboxed the special FIVR helmet and marveled at its beauty. He'd previously stopped using helmets after rising to Vice Guild leader in Dark Row, instead switching to the full immersive long-term pods. However, that technology wasn't available yet. It would arrive sometime next year and take the world by storm. That would be when Boundless would blow up to become the new world. So I have 1 year to build an unshakable empire in Boundless before the masses filter in and muddle everything up. Draco didn't wear the helmet, even after unboxing, because there was still a few hours to go until global launch. In the past, he had pretty much done what every other excited kid did, wear the helmet and lie there for hours watching the countdown with excitement. But after almost 15 years in the game, he couldn't muster that same level of excitement. Not that he hated the game, he had long treated it less as a game and more like another reality. After 5 years, these people would too, but at this time, it was still a fancy FIVR MMO to them. Draco rummaged through his supplies and surprisingly came across some pins, torn clothes, and some plain A4 sheets, as well as some of his old notebooks. He pulled a table over and surveyed his room carefully, laying down the design in his mind. When he reached a conclusion, he walked up to the wall opposite the foot of his bed and cleared one side of it. After cutting the old clothes into yarn-like strings, he took various unused sheets of A4 as well as from his old notebooks and pinned them on the wall against each other. With an old and barely functioning marker he unearthed from his old school supplies, he began using the papers as a canvas for his art. He wasn't doing anything fancy, just drawing a rough layout of the domain he had started in and based his guild in his past life, Sturgehaven Kingdom. The kingdom had 20 mid-tier cities, 4 high-tier cities including the capital, and countless small-tier cities scattered across the territory. Right now, Draco wasn't going to bother himself with the thousands of kingdoms in the first update of Boundless. Trying to rule the whole game in such a short time would be a pipe dream. It would be definitely possible for him to reach the pinnacle of his past life, but it would require time, and there was no shortcut for that. He labeled each of the key towns that had resources, rare quest lines and hidden quests that would immediately set him apart from the common folk. Having once ruled the whole land, he knew almost everything there was about it, which dungeons gave what loot and resources, which zonal areas had the rarest hidden chests as well as legacies, and which NPCs granted one-time rewards that could never be duplicated. Draco spent over 2.5 hours listing them all on his makeshift canvas. Even though it was arguably large, there still wasn't enough space for him to write it all without cramming. Probably he was the only one who could read this legibly, which he didn't really care about. After taking a short rest since his arms felt like lead after all that writing, Draco studied it for a while to determine his path forward. He had just splattered all the information he knew onto his canvas. Now was the time to analyze and find the path forward. Yep, so it's gonna have to be that way, huh? He murmured to himself, lost in a mixture of remembrance and contemplation. Nodding to himself, he turned to the FIVR helmet and strapped in on dexterously. There was no need to read manuals and ponder over its assemblage, he had done this every day for over 7 years in his past life. Loading. Brain scan initiating, please wait. 1%, 2%, 3%. Brain scan complete. Welcome to Boundless. This world is governed by the unique AI hive mind of the Glory Gore Studios, and for all intents and purposes. The annoying disclaimer came on, the devs explaining how they had no hand in anything going on in-game apart from small issues. The usual corporate lingo that essentially meant, hey, you bought it, so don't sue us if it messes up. Would you like to initiate the tutorial? Y/N. No. Please create your Boundless account. Username, Draco. Password. Account type, free. Package, master. With the account created and his details set, Draco was brought into a room that had a starry backdrop, as if he were floating in space. Overlaid on his vision was a countdown timer that told him there was less than 15 minutes to go until the game launched. Draco decided to use the time wisely and opened the character creation menu. Selecting the human race, his character appeared before him in full glory. In the age of VR and FIVR, there was no such thing as catfishing or the like anymore. Avatars would resemble their owners with only certain changes to cosmetics available. You couldn't change skin color, height, or build, but simple touch-ups could be made to make you look more attractive than in the real world. Of course, a monkey with makeup was still a monkey, so without a foundation, nothing would change. Draco nodded his head at his appearance. Although he was skinny and looked somewhat malnourished, there was no way to effectively smother his above-average handsomeness. It wasn't overbearing, but not negligible either. Enough to make you take a second look and fantasize, but not enough to make you put in the effort. His dark hair was curly and messy, forming bangs on his forehead. He had bright green eyes and thin lips. His face was developed and angular, which was the basis for his attractiveness. His avatar was garbed in a basic tunic and some trousers. He had some leather battle boots on his soles that allowed him to fight and run at the same time. Naturally, no weapons or ornaments were on the avatar's body at this juncture. Satisfied, he made his selection and confirmed it. Just as he was done, the area reverberated and the world seemed to crumble slowly. Select starting town, underscore 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 underscore. Draco quickly chose the town he planned to initiate his path to victory. Stagnant Moss Town. Town selected, transferring. With a pop sound, Draco's consciousness was pulled into the world of Boundless and his new journey in this land was about to begin. Chapter 3, Stagnant Moss Town. Upon loading into the game, Draco was deposited in the town square of Stagnant Moss Town. Around him were hundreds of other players coalescing into reality. While towns were smaller than cities, they were still big enough to support large populations, larger than usual in the real world. Stagnant Moss Town should have a starting population of 500,000 people, not counting players. Draco estimated that the player population should be less than 1,000, a relatively small amount for the area. After all, Stagnant Moss Town was one of the less obscure towns available in the Sturgehaven Kingdom. It should be noted that towns are functionally different from cities. Towns are basically starter areas where players can take low-level quests to familiarize themselves with the scope and diversity of Boundless and its combat system. There were 4 high-tier cities: Coldone City, Cario City, Farce City, and Sturgehaven City, with the latter being the capital city. Each one of them had its benefits and detriments over the other, but the secrets hidden in them could decide the fate of the world. Right now, players couldn't access cities until level 10. Guilds also could not be formed until level 10, which is the first benchmark level. At level 10, players would be assigned classes based on their attribute point distribution. Majority had no idea of this, and even few top-level experts were able to guess. Before level 10, players could learn any assortment of classless skills and 3 class-based skills, so players assumed this was the criteria for getting a class, but this wasn't it. It solely depended on your point distribution. More points in strength and endurance would grant a tank class, and even then, there were differences. High strength and endurance with some points put into spirit would lead to a paladin class. High strength with slightly less endurance and more intelligence would lead to a mage guard class. Many players ended up falling into categories they didn't aim for, and reset their accounts foolishly, falling behind players who took it as it was. The reasoning behind the AI's plan was that without foreknowledge of such a mechanic, players who allocated points based on preference would end up with classes that had the best potential for them. Someone who invested in intelligence and spirit would expect to get a mage class with high mana recovery, but would rather end up with a cleric class and restart. After a few years, those players would regret their hasty actions because the classes they wanted didn't suit them. Last time around, Draco had ended up with a fairly unique class that he didn't intend upon but stuck with because he didn't have the money to restart. That was a great thing because that very class abilities allowed him to rise to the top, even those who got the same class as him weren't as compatible. His class was a variation of the Spellblade class, the Avenger. Avengers were agility-focused swordsman classes with some minor magical capability, but mostly for passive use, unlike Spellblade who used active magic like fireballs. Draco knew the exact point allocation for the Avenger class, so he wasn't worried. Right now, he just needed to follow his early game plan to build a solid foundation for the mid-game season. Opening his character sheet, he gazed at it with a mixture of melancholy and loss. Name, Draco. Class, unallocated. Level, 1. EXP, 0%. STR, 1. Dex, 1. End, 1. Int, 1. SPR, 1. Cha, 1. LCK, 1. Combat skills, none. Trade skills, none. The simple and empty table really brought home the absurdity of his situation. Draco was long used to the 7th update's menu style and complexity, but there was something refreshing about this simplicity that made him take a pause. The AI was still collecting information for improvement, so things were pretty bare bones right now. Still, it would make his job easier, as the skill assist system was still active in the base version. Without wasting more time, Draco activated his package. Thank you for choosing the master package. Rewards: 2 health potion, 2 mana potion, 2 stamina potion, 1 common weapon set, 1 light armor set, 1 medium armor set, 1 heavy armor set, 3 blank trade skills books, 1 basic resources chest, 1 rare resources chest, 2 rare weapons chest, 3 blank uncommon combat skill books. Unfortunately, no matter how much money one injected out of game, you couldn't purchase in-game money. That was why these packages gave you a wide array of items, so that players could get some basic funds to kick off. It was precisely because of this clever mechanic that made Boundless so valuable. The patronization along with the rarity of resources made it similar to humanity discovering a new earth that had never been touched. It was a gold mine that could be reaped. The only difference was that in Boundless, being rich didn't give much of an advantage. Draco wasted no time shifting the potions to his limited slot inventory. He immediately equipped the medium armor set, which was a mixture of light plate on his thighs, calves, arms, and chest and cloth armor covering everywhere else underneath. It made his avatar look quite heroic actually. He put aside the common weapons and armor, as well as the other 2 armor sets. After all, he wasn't the only one who bought a package. Majority of players bought at least the basic package. The market would be flooded with these items and the value would drop drastically. Unlike most MMOs where items sold to NPC merchants had a fixed price, the market in Boundless was like the real world, working along the laws of supply and demand. Hundreds of adventurers selling trash-tier weapons and armor in such a small town was a disastrous idea. He quickly took out the 3 blank trade skill books and saw a selection menu pop up. There were countless trade skills available, but only common ones. Advanced trade skills like scribing, divination and accounting were unavailable to him. He didn't bother looking through and selected the best combination: blacksmithing, alchemy and enchanting. Congratulations on learning skill S. Blacksmithing, 1, 0%. Alchemy, 1, 0%. Enchanting, 1, 0%. Congratulations on opening 1 basic resources chest, smithing, alchemy, enchanting. 30 copper ore. 20 varium leaf. 20 gloya leaf. 20 seer leaf. 50 low-grade soul stone. 3 low-grade enchantments. Congratulations on opening 1 rare resources chest, smithing, alchemy, enchanting. 50 iron ore. 10 steel ore. 20 derrick plants. 20 Elarian herbs. 20 Selkto basil. 20 medium-grade soul stones. 5 high-grade soul stone. 1 medium-grade enchantment. Congratulations on opening 2 rare weapons chest, sword. Excalibur. Durandal. Draco cursed and swore angrily, making some idle players who were still selecting through their packages move away warily. Despite his heavily cultured and calm demeanor, he felt like going on a rampage and throwing the biggest tantrum. What the hell was this? Not even taking in the rare resources pack, the basic one was enough to make him hate destiny. 30 copper ore? 1 copper ore alone sold for almost 30 bronze. When the first player reached level 10, the intermediary trade center will be opened in each region, allowing players to purchase in-game currency and items from other players in an auction-like manner. At that time, 1 bronze coin would go for almost $3. Comparing that to how much was given, the 30 copper alone meant that players who went as far as buying the master package would have their money spent returned with a profit of almost 400%. That was why Draco was enraged. He had to slave and suffer as a Harvey in his past life just to make enough to pay the outlet cashier lady for a proper helmet, much less his living expenses. At that time, he had no idea of the value of these things, much like other players. Even the pro players had no clue. Most people would rush to sell the common weapons and armor while others would utilize these free items to raise their trade skill level. This realization almost made Draco spit blood and faint due to hatred as well as anger. Those poor fools. By the time they realized their mistake, everybody would be past that stage and there will be no point to it. But the difference was that Draco knew. All the items he had been given were 100 times more than he expected, and he began to fear that it was a glitch. With this, he didn't need to spend so much time on his early game plans. It could be done in less than 3 months, not even the 1 year he expected. Still, he wasn't done yet. He had to choose 3 uncommon skill books to learn. He naturally didn't have the privilege of gaining uncommon skills until he was almost level 40, so getting them at this stage made him woozy. Even so, he made his selection quickly: Cloud Feet, Revenger and Absolute Void. Cloud Feet, passive skill. Movement speed plus 20%. Attack speed plus 10%. Revenger, passive skill. Weapon damage plus 20%. Magical damage plus 20%. Absolute Void, active skill. Effect: create spatial anomaly in an area of 100*50 yards around user, which boosts attack and movement speed by 10% for each enemy within. No cap on percentile increase. Duration: 1 minute. Cooldown: 10 minutes. With this, it could easily be seen why the Avenger class was dangerous to other players. Unofficially, there were 2 types of classes: PvP classes and PvE classes. PvP classes were suited to battling other players in places like the arena, fighting ring, and for general player killing. PvE classes were typically suited for dungeoneering, exploration and harvesting. PvP classes included assassins, poisonmancers, spellblades, while PvE classes were the typical classes like swordsmen, berserkers, mages, clerics. A class was good one and not so good at the other, but the Avenger class was different. It was the literal best of both worlds, with insane speed and damage enhancements. The passives alone were mind-boggling because percentage boosts, even on items, would only exist on epic items and above, yet this class could learn them as passive skills, which meant no cooldown and no cost. They would also grow depending on class advancements. The active skills also focused on percentage boosts for a period of time, instead of dealing direct or indirect damage. After all, the Avenger class was based on the theory of rage moments from anime and manga, that in a moment of absolute fury or loss, intense power boosts would be granted for revenge. Clearly, the AI had had too much access to miscellaneous data when forming classes. The downside to the Avenger class was, of course, its rarity and its abysmal leveling speed. Still, there were ways around it, which was his next goal. Before heading out, Draco decided to check the stats of the 2 weapons he was given before equipping them. Excalibur, one-handed sword. Rank, rare. ATK SPD, 5. DMG, 30 to 70. Effect, movement speed plus 10%, sword mastery skill plus 2. Durandal, one-handed sword. ATK SPD, 2. DMG, 50 to 90. Effect, damage plus 10%, sword mastery skill plus 2. Draco swore loudly again, making players frown at him, some even thinking about whether or not they should report him. Not even the damage, the effects of these two swords were absurd for meager rare weapons. These kind of effects were only seen on epic and above items. This reminded him of his old nickname when he had popularized the sheer overpowered nature of this class. They called him the Flash because the Avenger class moved so quickly that even anime and wuxia characters would look on in awe. With these speed boosts alone, most wouldn't even be able to discern his attacks. There was also the fact that Draco had the ACCU-related combat experience of over 15 years of FIVR gaming, which outside these boosts, was enough for him to wipe the floor with almost every player in Boundless worldwide. Sighing, he could only accept his fate and equip the weapons. With that done, he sprinted towards the town hall. While out of combat, stamina wouldn't be consumed so players could run for eternity. It solely depended on your speed, but the sheer size of Boundless made long-distance running a daunting task. As for Draco's current movement speed, well, suffice to say many players were dazed when his form blurred past them. Who the hell was that? How should I know? God, he was so fast. Damn, he scared me shitless. Can I sue for that? Bruh, it's 2065, you can sue for everything. Draco only heard these remarks in passing and smirked. When he got his grimy hands on the actual Avenger class, these people would see true speed and power. Upon reaching the large town hall, he noticed there was a queue outside of those lining up to go in for starter quests. But that wasn't the only attraction of the town hall area. Outside, there were various groups huddled together, some seated at stands and others standing, all shouting a similar call. Join Desecrators today. Accepting pro and amateur players alike. Line up for the chance to join Kamizuo. Only accepting players with a package. Last chance to join Lorebinders. Only accepting players with a master level package. These were impromptu recruitment stands that allowed external guilds to recruit members and build a power base before the guild system was unlocked. Upon recruitment, one would sign a digital contract which would be inescapable, otherwise who's to say that your Harveys wouldn't run away? Draco sneered at these time wasters. Instead of rushing to level, they were seated here like kings and queens. Their guild leaders were probably in this very line somewhere trying to rush to level 10 so they could officially start a guild. Draco didn't bother to join the line, there was nothing there for him. What he did was pass an alley behind the town hall that led to a very obscure area. Some players noticed him go that way with looks of confusion and ridicule. What's that player doing? Doesn't he know he has to line up? Whatever, must be a noob. He's probably going to get mugged. I heard NPCs in this game can rob players. Poor fool, I feel bad for him. Well, he's lucky he isn't a girl. Then losing his items wouldn't be the only thing he'd have to worry about. Draco ignored their ignorant remarks and disappeared from their view. Majority of them lost interest in this noob, but some of them watched with worry, wondering if they should help, while others were simply curious as to the outcome. At this moment, Draco was crouched before an emaciated child beggar who could barely see what was in front of him. The poor lad was barely conscious, a mere inch away from death due to starvation and dehydration. In the second year of Boundless in his past life, a bored amateur player decided to stroll through the town and found this alleyway. There, he had seen this half-dead boy and taken pity on him. He fed him and nurtured him back to full health and created one of the most rewarding hidden quests for the early stage of Boundless. Draco took out Durandal and impaled the boy on the sword while sneering at him. It easily pierced through his chest and killed him on the spot. Pulling the sword out, he sheathed it and waited. The player had created a powerful quest by saving the boy, but the quest came in the form of a calamity. In the end, he even lost his account's functionality due to the side effects of his actions. That was because this poor-looking boy was none other than the third son of Mephisto, one of the most powerful devils in the world of Boundless. When the player nurtured him back to health, he repaid his kindness with the Devilkin's most feared ability, Omega Blast. This blast directly attacked a player's immortal spirit, or more precisely, their ability to respawn. The higher the grade of the devil, the more potent. The son of the Devil King essentially meant his account was gone for good. The kingdom had to mobilize almost 90% of its paladin army just to subdue him long enough to get the hidden powers to exterminate the boy. By that time, countless towns had been vanquished and many players lost their accounts. Right on cue, a black mist seeped from the boy's body, coiling around his head like a snake. Name, Devil Essence, Unique Monster. HP, 200/200. Of course, Draco was no fool. He wasn't going to attack the son of the most powerful devil at level 1 if he didn't know there was a way to do it. Unlike the main body, a devil's essence was released after its death, mimicking the level of the person who killed it. And with NPCs and monsters, a same level situation would always be advantageous to the NPC. Coming here and fighting this thing at level 10 would be much more difficult than fighting it at level 1, especially with his powerful weapons and passive skills. The devil essence took on the shape of a spear and hurtled towards Draco lightning fast. A newbie player still getting to know the game would be caught off guard and skewered, but with his level of expertise, Draco didn't even need to dodge. He simply swung Excalibur, the speedier sword, in a thrusting motion, allowing its tip to hit that of the spear. The precise timing and accuracy meant that, not only was the Devil Essence spear pushed back, it even took a damage of 30 points. Draco didn't drag it out by giving it time to recover, immediately following up with a swing from Durandal, the damage-heavy sword. But it must be said, even though this Devil's Essence was only level 1, it was not a common monster. Its reaction time and power were beyond that of any other ranking. By the time Draco had reached it, the Devil Essence had already morphed into a round shield with a spike in the middle. It planned to use his own momentum to impale him on its shield. It could be seen that this monster's level of intelligence and combat wisdom was above even humans. Draco sneered and brought Excalibur around in an uppercut sweep. Seeing the second sword cleaving towards it, the shield made the fatal mistake of tilting towards Excalibur's blade, aiming to deflect it. Excalibur's swing was a decoy for Durandal. After all, this was the damage-dealing blade. Draco activated Absolute Void and became even faster, bringing Durandal round and cutting into the Devil Essence. With an otherworldly shriek, a damage number of 250 appeared above its head, totally bottoming out its HP with some left to spare. Instantly, Draco's experience bar rose up with maddening speed, completing almost 7 cycles before resting at the latter stage of level 7. But that wasn't all, far from it. Before him came a screen displaying his rewards. When Draco's eyes scrolled through them, he almost spat blood and fainted. Chapter 4, Mephisto's Killing Intent. Congratulations on defeating the legendary demon Ratchet, third son of Mephisto. 775% EXP. Special rank, Lightbringer. 3000 gold. 1 legendary treasure chest. 200 reputation with the Church of Light. 1000 reputation with all human, elf and dwarven kingdoms and empires. Draco was utterly shocked. Putting aside the experience he gained, even the gold was unbelievable. At this stage of the game, even the most affluent player had at best 20 bronze coins to his name. Draco had received a whole 3000 gold coins. The money system was rather unremarkable, following the same trend as MMOs of old. 100 bronze made 1 silver, 100 silver made 1 gold, 100 gold made 1 platinum. Average players would only have a single gold coin to their name by the time the first update comes in, and yet Draco gulped and regained his composure. Then his eyes scrolled down and he lost it again. Reputation points? A whole 1,000 with every human, elf and dwarven kingdom and empire. The rankings in Boundless were simple with regards to reputation. 100 reputation points made you eligible to become a lord. 300 reputation points made you a minor noble. 500 reputation points made you a proper noble. 700 brought you to the level of a high noble. 1000 made you a minor duke. At this tier, Draco was eligible to own a portion of land in the kingdom in which the reputation was awarded, as well as a myriad of other powers. The main one that most players craved for was the one which was the most evil, the ability to stand above the law. One thing about humans will always be that, apart from other humans, and even sometimes including other humans, our kind looked down on everything else. Be it flora and fauna or even uncategorized life forms, humankind would always take the higher position innately and attempt to dominate and sometimes abuse. This especially held true for NPCs, which majority of people felt were just computer programs and not real. Even Draco believed same in his past life, but it all ended after the second update. At that point, NPCs were given rights by the World Council. The points with the Church of Light were even more precious, because it opened a plethora of paths and classes for Draco. The Church of Light was bigger than any kingdom or empire, in fact spanning across each of them. Picture it like every kingdom was ancient Rome, where the Vatican as well as the Pope had equal powers to the king. With the Church of Light having such power in every kingdom, it was easy to see where the true power lied. The reason the countries allow this was because the Church doesn't follow the stereotypical script of being greedy or overzealous to the point of evil, but act like a true median between the gods and mortals. They possessed items, inheritances, and legacies that could not be obtained anywhere else in Boundless. In the 13th year of Boundless in Draco's past life, a player who had accrued 70 reputation points with the Church after painstakingly working for over 5 years was able to access the Church's armory to receive a divine weapon. With that divine weapon, he became a one-man army in Boundless who no one could afford to fend. If Draco was number 3 in the rankings, then that player was number 2. Draco had almost triple that player's points, so he surmised that he could gain a lot more than a divine weapon from the Church, which excited him. However, Draco decided not to rush and rather complete more hidden quests to gain such rewards. Who knew, if he raised his reputation with the Church to 500 points, they just might give him a divine emblem to become a lesser god and build his own pantheon. Finally, he eyed the legendary treasure chest with palpable lust. Draco had never looked at any woman the way he looked at this chest. If he could copulate with it, he would long be thrusting away. To a professional player in this genre of gaming, loot was everything. His final war with Darkrow, in which he captured his old lover Riveting Knight, was all for the Orb of Worlds, which was just a semi-legendary item. Neither of their guilds had possessed a legendary item, even 15 years after the game was released. His old weapon, the Mana Sword, was the closest to one there was, a pseudo-legendary item. Only the players in ranking 2 and 1 had divine items, which were the ultimate weapons. He didn't even know what exactly they were, other than the fact that they were overpowered beyond belief. And yet, at a measly level 7, Draco had more than he ever gained in 15 years of play. Arguably, the reason could be said that he spent far too much time waging war instead of exploring. Now, with no need to follow the path of hate, he could properly enjoy Boundless as he should have before. One thing he had no inkling of an idea of was this special rank. He had only heard of the nobility rankings and nothing else. Hell's Cape's information gathering was on par with the US government within Boundless. So if such a thing had been acquired before, he would have long known. After all, more than 95% of the player base would boast about discovering hidden quests and rewards in order to gain recognition. Only about 5% had the sense to keep their cards hidden as they climbed to the top. Lightbringer special rank. 500% damage against evil aligned beings. 500% defense against evil aligned beings. To say that Draco was shocked would be a gross understatement. This special rank granted him boons he never thought he'd ever get. The damage and defense boost against evil aligned beings was at the level of a berserk aura from a divine weapon, and this was passive. If it weren't for the fact that there were few evil aligned beings, he would steamroll over the world and dominate everyone. Still, this boon had once again greatly shortened his estimates. Evil aligned beings were split into two categories, monsters and players. Players who were evil aligned chose either dark races or were enrolled in a dark guild. So that meant that Draco was effectively assassin-proof. He laughed bitterly at that notion. If he had such an ability in real life, he wouldn't have died and had to be reincarnated. He shoved his rising regret and melancholy, focusing on what was before him. He was at a turning point with all this. Suddenly, Draco's eyes lit up as he remembered a nugget of information from his past life. There was a quest where this particular rank would make him breeze through and serve as a solid foundation for his future empire. Draco, however, knew better than to open or even take out his legendary treasure chest in a player-populated town. That would be the same as placing a nude magazine of Scarlett Johansson in front of a gaggle of pubescent teen boys. Looking left and right, he cackled evilly while planning to head out to the location of his next quest. The moment he took a step, however, the clouds darkened and a pressure that transcended everything caught him and every living being within 1,000 kilometers of stagnant Mosstown. Some weaker and already unwell NPCs passed away at that moment. Coupled with this tyrannical pressure, was a powerful voice filled with rage. Who dares? The earth shook and the sky churned. A face appeared in the clouds that was arguably handsome, but contained all the world's arrogance. Looking up to that face really made one feel like an insignificant ant before its might and importance. Who killed my sweet Ratchy boy? Draco coughed blood and fell to his knees. This wasn't from the mental and spiritual pressure, but from the absurdity of this being's claim. Ratchet being sweet? Much less calling him Ratchy boy. That boy had laid waste, pillaged, slaughtered and r.a.p.ed like there was nothing to stop him. Draco had spent close to a month in the bowels of fear, having to hide and occasionally fight to survive during the calamity in his past life. His memories of Ratchet's true nature was engraved on his soul. That was why he could mercilessly stab a young boy without remorse. Suddenly, his eyes brightened as his mind churned irrespective of the pressure on it. Draco put two and two together and gulped warily. Obviously, the being in the sky was Mephisto, loving father and the fount of evil. Draco cursed his luck, but understood why this happened. After all, in his past life, Ratchet wasn't killed by a measly level 1 player but the hidden powers of the kingdom that could give Mephisto a headache. Not only that, they had the justification since Ratchet escaped the devil world and wreaked havoc in the human world. In fact, the Mephisto in his past life was lucky that no dimensional war had occurred from Ratchet's actions, so everything was buried with Ratchet's death. However, in this timeline Ratchet had been recuperating after suffering from the heaven's wrath for crossing into the human world before he was killed. Of course Mephisto would come to seek revenge and use this as justification to start a war. Where is he? Bring him out to meet your greatest grandfather Mephisto and I'll stop killing your descendants after the 200th generation. Some players outright passed out due to a mixture of intense pressure and indignation from the Devil King's words. Players wouldn't unlock the child-rearing ability until the 5th update, so they had nothing to worry about yet, but they didn't know that. Also, the sheer tyrannical nature of his words shocked most of them. Draco climbed back to his feet after shrugging off the intense mental pressure. While Mephisto certainly was something, Draco had faced situations just as bad or even worse in his past life and his mental strength had reached a level no one in this timeline could match. He grimaced as his mind roiled with means and ways to escape his current predicament without having his account crippled. He could care less if he was killed once or twice with what he had earned so far, but with the Omega Blast, he absolutely couldn't afford to be caught. He swore internally. If he had the actual Avenger class and some more passive skills, he could barely escape using sheer speed. After all, the same way Ratchet suffered brutally for leaving the demon realm, Mephisto couldn't leave. He could just barely broadcast his killing intent from the demon realm, and all this was the result. If the main body were here, he wouldn't even need to bother searching for Draco. With a wave of his hand, stagnant Mosstown would become a thing of the past. At the current level, no player could resist Mephisto's slight killing intent. If Draco were to assign it a level and rank based on the pressure alone, it would be a level 75 major. Apart from NPCs in the cities, no one could stand up to him, certainly not in this outlying town. With a sigh, Draco realized that there was no way out of this. Right now, what he needed to do was stall for time until the powerful NPCs arrived. There was no way they would miss the sudden appearance of the Devil King's astral form. It was even possible that they come here solely to verify the death of Ratchet. If the Devil King could feel it from a whole different realm, the hidden powers here could too. Mephisto, your ugly and illiterate son was killed by Daddy Draco. The question I have for you is, what are you gonna do about it? Draco roared to the heavens. Almost immediately, the killing intent focused solely on Draco, forcing him to grit his teeth to remain standing. Oh. This. Interesting. As a mere germ, you can remain standing in my heavenly presence. From now on, you have been promoted from bacteria to an ant. This is probably the highest you'll ever reach, Mephisto commented with mild surprise. Draco almost fainted from his words. Not because of the sheer arrogance or the meaning behind them, but because he could sense that this was done in total honesty. Mephisto's arrogance was so strong it had been carved into his very being. In his mind, Draco should be on his knees shedding tears of joy from this promotion. But how could anyone accept this? Listen here, Forktail. Grandpa Draco challenges you to a mental battle. Flash your strongest killing intent onto my sacred mind, and if I can withstand it for 5 minutes, you must leave until I'm strong enough to put up a fight before seeking revenge. Draco's words made Mephisto ponder. As for the rudeness, he couldn't care less. Would a fully grow adu.l.t go on a tantrum because an ant climbed in his boot? At worst, he'd just kick it away and move on. Mephisto's reaction was similar. As the Devil King, he was subtly surprised by this human's words and actions so far. And to kill his third son, the wildest of them all at such a level. This human was interesting. Mephisto sensed that he could get a good brawl from this fellow when he became strong enough in the future. His battle intent soared at the notion, and he felt a sliver of excitement. But first, a test. All right, Ant. Your greatest grandfather's greatest grandpa had decided to humor you. If you can survive for a minute, I'll let you go and wait until you can manage to reach 1 million kilometers around my real body without dying before fighting you. Mephisto answered with a cryptic smile. Before Draco could fire a cheeky retort, a wave of insurmountable mental pressure crashed down on him, forcing him to stoop slightly. His face was a mask of pain as he fought to remain standing in the face of such power. Each second seemed to last a millennium to Draco as he felt the weight on his mind grow until he started coughing blood and fell to his knees. At this time, barely 10 seconds out of the 1 minute had gone by. Clearly, Draco's bold challenge to last 5 whole minutes was made in excess. After 30 seconds, he was on all fours and had run out of blood to cough. Any more and his innards would mix in with the release. Draco felt like he was in Atlas shoes, having to carry the whole sky on his shoulders. With a bitter smile, he released his own killing intent and aura that he had carefully hidden since reincarnating. He had kept it bottled up as a last resort and a trump card in case a situation out of his expectations occurred. Clearly, now was such a time. Killing intent was not something of the body. The idea that people would smell of blood if they killed a lot was absurd and unrealistic. What most people assumed was killing intent was in fact, Special energy waves emitted from the brain as signals which can only be interpreted by a person's subconscious. This energy wave served as a warning, hence people would feel like those with intense killing intent were creepy. This kind of thing transcended the corporeal realm and was a thing of the mind. As such, even though Draco's current body had yet to take a life, his killing intent from 15 years of in-game and out-of-game killing was present in full force. At this point, he could barely push himself off the ground and stare at Mephisto with a grimace. Although Mephisto's face was neutral, his mind was reeling. A mere human possessed such intense killing intent? Just who was he? What had he seen and done to possess such a demonic aura? Even the current Demon King might grimace in the face of this mortal. Mephisto's battle intent soared, and he was looking forward to the day he could battle this mortal. He felt that he could gain some basicumus.e.m.e.nt from such a brawl. With that in mind, he increased the pressure to the max, forcing Draco back to his knees. But no matter how much pressure he emitted, he never went back to all fours. There was a trace of unshakable determination in Draco's eyes as he stared at Mephisto's avatar with utmost defiance. Good lad. This boy will give me a good battle in a few years. I'd better send a few challenges his way to make his path more difficult. After all, only in the face of adversity can one blossom. Mephisto thought. Just as Mephisto was about to end the whole charade, his face changed sharply into an expression of fear as a rickety voice of an old man resounded through the skies. Mephisto, old buddy. Stand there and die for your greatest grandfather's grandpa Lord Nakayu. Chapter 5, Bargain Bin Soup. To describe Mephisto's expression as terrified would be an understatement. If it weren't for his tyrannical actions up till now, Draco would even believe that Mephisto was a poor tormented child who heard the approaching footsteps of his dreaded bully. Nakayu. Damn it, why are you still alive? F.U.C.K. Mephisto cursed before turning to flee. Haha. Best buddy Fisto, stay around. I want to kill you once and for all today. Then afterwards, I'll worm my way into the heart of Krista and cuckold you. Lord Nakayu laughed as he gave chase to Mephisto's fleeing form. The old man's voice was different from his appearance. While his voice made him sound like he was 1 inch away from death, the man looked like those old men who were placed on fitness magazines. He had flowing white hair that reached his waist that was billowing in the air. Draco assumed he was tall, but couldn't tell due to the distance between them. He wore a simple white robe and rode on a nimbus cloud like Gaku. He looked more like a character from a Xiangxia cultivation novel rather than a Western game NPC. Draco wasn't surprised. After all, the AI for Boundless had access to almost everything except for military assets. This world was made to accommodate everything fictional and historical, so there were a myriad of elements within. After the two disappeared into the horizon, Draco breathed a sigh of relief. Remembering himself, he creeped out of the alleyway to see the players and NPCs in heated discussion about what just occurred. What the hell was that? It felt like my body was trapped in ice. This game is too wonky. That was too weird. I swear I saw something in the sky. Like a face or something. I did too. A really arrogant face that needed punching. Draco ignored them and blended in as if nothing strange had happened as he made his way to one corner of the marketplace from the town hall area. Unbeknownst to him, there was a hooded woman watching him carefully. Nothing could be seen of her features, but her form told of an exquisite beauty. Beside her stood a woman wearing the basic outfit for clerics, a white dress with delicate embroidery. She was observing the area warily when she saw her companion's riveted gaze. Guild leader, what's wrong? Sublime Notion asked. He is, interesting. I feel like I know him. But. Riveting Knight answered with an unsteady voice. This made Sublime Notion perk up. Her best friend hardly ever spoke much and she never sounded uncertain. The fact that two characteristics of her personality had been breached instantly roused her interest. When she saw who her guild leader was observing, she let out a cold snort. Him. He's slightly above average. The boys who are chasing after you in the university are much more attractive. Especially that rich young master, Johnny Blaze. This scrawny guy can hardly match up. Riveting Knight did not reply to that, but continued staring at Draco. Her eyes shined with interest and complex emotions were roiling through her. She was mostly cold and aloof to everything and everyone, but she felt something from him. No one could hear it, but a mad god was laughing in the background. Draco entered the marketplace and walked up to the Merchants' Association. Upon entry, he was admitted to fairly impressive lounge where NPCs were either relaxing or conversing about political and financial topics. These men were obviously affluent. In fact, the basic requirement to even enter this building was to be a lord. No one seated here was someone a normal player could afford to offend. Draco walked up to one of the counters to see a beautiful young lady manning it. The NPCs he passed stopped what they were talking to greet him with a good day, Lord Duke. None of them ranked higher than him in this town. The highest would probably be a minor noble and they definitely could not afford to offend Draco. Good day, my Lord Duke. What would you need from the Merchants' Association? The clerk asked with a calm demeanor. After all, serving people in power 24/7 would render you immune to their power. I would like to obtain a permit to set up a small stall in the marketplace. Draco replied while leaning on the counter. The girl's calm demeanor broke due to her surprise, which was understandable. Mostly, it was commoners who came for such permits. Draco's actions were the equivalent of a known billionaire asking to buy a second-hand car. Not exactly illegal or wrong, but weird. Still, she was smart enough not to ask or delay. My Lord Duke, that would normally cost 10 bronze, but such fees are waived for nobility at your level. Taxes are also waived. Please fill in the details here and your request will be processed. It actually wasn't a rule for nobility not to pay taxes or fees for common stalls, but this was unprecedented. This clerk was clever enough not to risk asking a minor duke for 10 bronze. She would rather have her pay deducted, though she surmised her superiors would be understanding. In less than half an hour, Draco was seated at a polished and custom-built stall near the center of the marketplace. He also paid for a beauty to be present to help advertise the stall. His stall's banner read, "Buying common weapons and armor for 15 bronze a set. Buying materials for 50 bronze for a stack." Naturally, the combination of a beautiful lady and such an outrageous stall attracted attention of players. Many flocked over to see whether this was real or a scam and soon a crowd had formed around Draco's stall. Before Draco opened his stall, he purchased a vagrant's bandana, which was an item that prevented players from seeing your face, name, and level for half a day. He wasn't foolish enough to show himself while making a commotion like this. Oi, do you guys see this? Some noobs offering such outrageous prices for these useless weapons the devs made to help players earn some basic funds. I feel like it's a scam. This is way too good to be true. But then again, how would a player get the permission of the Merchants Guild and such a hot beauty from their store to advertise for him? Honestly, does it matter? I heard the going price for a common armor set is now 5 bronze. This guy is offering almost triple the price. You'd be lucky to get 5 bronze. That tyrannical armor smith is offering 2 bronze for each set and he's the last person offering since he can smelt it for raw materials. The other shopkeepers won't even accept it for free. Well, then f.u.c.k it. I'm going to bite the bullet and be the scapegoat. A player wearing plate mail stepped forth from the chattering crowd and stood before Draco's stall with a determined gaze. The crowd hushed and watched to see what would happen. Most were skeptical about the authenticity of Draco's claims, but stuck around just in case. Hello fellow player, I want to sell my weapon and armor set to you at the price you've offered. Is such a thing possible? The player, whose name showed to be Scorched Earth, asked warily. Draco replied without moving. That's the point of this stall. I wouldn't have the merchant guild's permit to operate if I couldn't pay. They've taken a safety deposit to reimburse aggrieved parties in case I default. Scorched Earth unconsciously looked towards the beauty from the merchant's guild to confirm Draco's words. When she nodded and graced him with a beautiful smile, his heart fluttered. Taking a deep breath, Scorched Earth decided to go all in. Here's my items. The two opened their trade panels and initiated the trade. Draco received the items and Scorched Earth received payment. His eyes widened comically at the sight of just under 100 bronze in his inventory. Laughing almost manically, he turned and announced to the crowd that everything was legit. Naturally, this caused an uproar and a fight ensued to get in the line to trade. Draco sighed and nodded to his aide. She nodded back and clapped her hands, which caused all the players within 100 meters of the stall's area to freeze. This was different from the pressure of Mephisto's killing intent, which was a skill or ability. The aide's ability to freeze players in the marketplace was one of the power of the Merchant's Guild, Order. With this power, unruly players causing trouble to sellers would be frozen and arrested without fail. The players in Draco's past life would never have caused such a commotion, even if a legendary item was being sold. The consequences weren't worth it. Please line up and place your goods to be sold or you will be arrested for harassment of guild licensed sellers, she announced with a smile. With that, players were released from their temporary spell. Almost as if it were planned, each of them quietly joined the queue with looks of shame and weariness. The trade resumed and went on for almost 6 hours. More than half the player population in stagnant Mosstown had sold weapons, armor, and some materials to Draco and had felt like they'd profited. Draco chuckled and didn't rise to taunts or jeers that he was throwing away money like an idiot. He had spent over 300 gold so far, but his gains couldn't even be measured based on his plans. This would probably be the easiest hurdle he would ever jump in his career in Boundless. When the amount of players coming to his stall died down, he closed up and thanked everyone before leaving. Of course, a crowd had formed to see if he would unveil his identity. Many had asked about his identity, to which he ignored. Some asked him to join their guilds, which he rejected regardless of how sweet they made it. Others just stood around hoping to get something out of this. After all, Draco's protection was only in the marketplace. Should he leave town to grind, he'd find a whole slew of players looking to rob him. How could Draco not have considered this before setting up his stall? He had a 1001 ways to avoid these guys, but took the evilest route. Draco entered the Merchant's Guild to drop off the aide and give her a hefty tip for helping him out. Normal players couldn't enter the guild without a certain status, so they all realized that Draco was not a normal player. Many who were looking to profit from his misfortune decided to give up and left. Only the truly hardy players remained, and they each looked to each other before nodding. The general consensus: rob him first, divide later. It was undoubtedly rare to see thieves working in harmony, but this was a special occasion. These hardy men stood outside the guild for hours. Occasionally, a person would exit and they would rush forth to accost them, but each time they realized it wasn't their prey but some pompous NPC. They remained waiting for hours on end, and the constant false alarms had made them irritable and impatient. Suddenly, a young-looking fellow came out of the building. He wore a cloak that concealed his face as he hurried into one of the nearby alleys. The fellows who were watching his exit sighed in relief and looked to one another with excitement. Finally, their payday had arrived. They made no subtle movements to hide their intent, as they all rushed into the alley and surrounded the youngster. A cold voice came from the cloak in response to their actions. "What is the meaning of this?" They smirked to each other, and the bulliest one of them all stepped forth to become the spokesperson. "Listen here, friend, empty your inventory and we'll let you go." The man in the cloak watched them coldly, casting his gaze around. "There's no escape, friend. Just make it easy on yourself and do the right thing," the burly player repeated, whose name turned out to be More Wine. The victim, however, let out a cold snort before speaking. Do you really think I'm so stupid as to flaunt my wealth and then walk into an alleyway with no one around? Did you not stop to think that this might be a trap? After all, I'm a player with money and reputation. The city guard is on my side. No, the very system is on my side. Draco's words were like a bucket of cold water that splashed on top of their heads. It instantly sobered them up, and the greed that had been clouding their minds receded as logic took hold. Some of those at the back revealed hesitant expressions. After all, they had been waiting for hours to get the loot, and even though there might be nothing for them, they just couldn't muster the will to turn around and leave. Draco still observed everyone calmly, as if everything that was occurring was happening to someone else and he was just a bystander. The assailants around him had gone quiet, even more whine. They didn't spout any more nonsense because they weren't scripted characters, they knew when they were in a bind. False confidence would not help. Instead, they stood there and waited. If Draco made a move, they would too. Both sides were observing each other silently to see who would make the first move. There was palpable tension in the air as a stare down occurred in this alleyway. Aya, thank God you guys waited. Now I can send you off well. Draco broke the tension with a relieved voice. Huh. More whine's confusion was present in every assailant's expression as they parsed Draco's words. They couldn't make heads or tails of what he meant. Send them off well. Suddenly, a white-toothed smile bloomed from under the hood of the cloak, and Morwine felt like he was looking into the abyss of doom. Not good. Scatter! He shouted while turning to run. He barely took 2 steps when his body froze and his screen went gray. His avatar disappeared from the game and 2 words were embossed into his retinas. You died. That was risky. Thankfully, thugs will always be the same. So easy to manipulate, Draco remarked with a sneer. He tucked away his second goblin werk bomb that he purchased from the Merchants Guild with his special status. Gnomish and goblin werk items were prized tools in Boundless as they mostly incorporated steampunk elements. In a world where sword and sorcery was the norm, a bomb or a flintlock pistol went a long way. But access to these items was reserved for those with enough money and had weight to their names, otherwise this world would have hit the Industrial Revolution already. Draco sighed and looked to the sky, pondering his next actions. He needed to purchase a few supplies before heading out of town to trek across the countryside. There was a shanty town about 20 kilometers from this location that held an A-level guild tier quest that had amazing rewards. That was what Draco purchased all the items for, since there was a workaround for having low manpower for that quest. He left to make preparations for his journey to the west. On a rooftop nearby was the concealed form of a woman clad in tight leathers. If Draco were to see her, his heart would stop. That was because she was none other than Riveting Knight, the woman who stole his heart and crushed it, turning a lovesick boy into a heartless fiend. At this moment, Riveting Knight was watching Draco leave with complex emotions. Some part of her wanted to approach him and apologize, while another part wanted to stay idle and remain vigilant. The source of these emotions were not Riveting Knight herself. There was a force working in the shadows that was trying to subtly upset the flow of time. This being had connected a tiny thread from Draco's old timeline, which was slowly fading away due to redundancy, and the current one. This thread was from one person in the future to another in the past. Only one person was slowly receiving memories and feelings from an era which would no longer exist after Draco upsets the timeline again. This man. I must keep an eye on him. For safety reasons. Yes, that's right. Riveting Knight whispered to herself while clutching her chest. A palpable feeling of discomfort arose which she couldn't interpret. This was emotional pain, but the usually indifferent Riveting Knight wouldn't know this. Chapter 6, Lord Richmond the Great. Draco left stagnant Mosstown without any special fanfare or event. He had used his gold to expand his inventory slots to the maximum that could be possessed before the first update. It cost him a total of 30 gold, which no player would be able to afford easily until the first update. It could be seen that if not for the reincarnation of Draco, the AI would have predicted everything perfectly. Draco even knew about the effects of his actions. Who didn't know of the butterfly effect? That was the main reason he was in a hurry to build a powerful foundation before the timeline went out of control and his 15 years of knowledge became redundant. He was currently sprinting across the countryside, passing through various zonal areas which were all within the range of level 3 to level 5. All the monsters in these areas were semi-intelligent and could not aggro on him due to his high level. Even if they could, they would need to match his insane speed first. Before leaving, Draco had already assigned his points. Between levels 1 to 10, a player earned 5 points per level. This was to allow them to build a foundation for the future. After every class advancement, points earned would drop until they became a rare resource. At that point, focus would shift from attributes to weapons and skills. At level 7, he had gained 35 points to allocate as he wished. Draco already knew the optimal point distribution for the Avenger class. In fact, in his past life he had been 1 point away from the optimal distribution for the class. The optimal point distribution for the Avenger class was 5 STR, 15 Dex, 8 Int, 10 Int, 10 SPR, 5 CHA, 5 LCK. Draco had allocated everything similarly, but had only 14 points in Dex. This wasn't his fault though. He only got to know the optimal point distribution through intense research over 15 years of trial and error. A player had 1 point in every stat at the beginning and only earned 50 points over 10 levels. Even if you knew the optimal distribution, you would still arrive at the same allocation Draco made. It wasn't fate, just maths. The only way to hit that perfect point distribution was to earn it externally. There were hidden ways to do that which not even 90% of the pros in Draco's past life knew, much less the players of this timeline. Fortunately, as one of the former supreme powers of Boundless, he knew a few tricks. Along the way, Draco diverted his path around a level 7 zonal area called Gurren Forest. This place was a low-level area that mostly had humanoid monsters like orcs and goblins. This place was different from the level 1 to 5 zones where the enemies were mostly low-intelligence beasts. These ones had some modic .u.m of cognizance, which made them a real challenge in battle, even for parties of the same level. Since this zone was about the same level as Draco, the monsters here quickly aggroed on him and a train of enemies began. By the time he had moved about halfway towards the center of this forest, the train behind him had grown to an astounding proportion. Any normal player would have their heart freeze at the sight, and even bystanders would feel their scalps go numb. Draco, however, just smirked as he sped along. Unfortunately, since the enemies had aggroed on him, that meant he had entered combat. His stamina was dropping rapidly and he had less than half remaining. Still, Draco revealed no trace of panic on his face. He took out a vial of greenish liquid and drank it in one gulp. A green glow surrounded his body as his stamina rose rapidly. The potion he drank was an advanced type, with both an overtime and instant effect. Generally, consumables, especially potions, had one of two applications, either an overtime effect which either damages or restores something by a set amount over a fixed amount of time, or instant effect, which most people preferred but were more expensive. These would either damage or restore something by a fixed amount almost immediately. Some had activation times and most had cooldowns. Draco had splurged and bought one with both. Half of the effect is dealt instantly and the rest over time. Let's not talk about the price, or the misers in the crowd will have heart attacks. His objective was simple: gather all the enemies in this zonal area and train them on the person at the center of this zone. One thing players had no inkling of was special NPCs that existed within certain zones. These NPCs offered one-time rewards to those who found them after fulfilling specific conditions. Some of them disappeared after a player found them for the first time, and some reappeared after a certain amount of time passed. It didn't take him long to capture almost every monster in the area. If you looked behind Draco, you'd see a sea of orcs, goblins and other woodland monsters of lore chasing after him with red eyes. The mouths were pulled into a snarl and they seemed to be silently screaming the word kill, or even devour, which was a blood-curdling sight. Well, it's about time. I have very little left in the way of supplies for the side quest. I need to conserve them for my destination. With that in mind, Draco entered the central zone of the Gurren forest, where a homely cottage was situated beside a clear lake. The sunlight dripped in between the canopy to create one of the most picturesque sights Draco had ever seen. If a scene like this were painted, it would set a precedent in the art community. Outside the cottage sat an old man smoking a pipe. He was a typical Whitebeard mage, with the long blue robe, pointy hat, and knee-length beard. He was in a rocking chair that looked rickety and honestly, should have broken a decade ago. The moment Draco saw him, he also saw Draco. With a hearty laugh, he called over. "Ahoy there, young lad. Why don't you come here and chat with Uncle Richmond so that f.u.c.k." His hearty welcome was ruined by his sudden cursing, but who could blame him? If you had managed to carve out a place for yourself in one of the most homely and aesthetical zones for some brat to bring almost every wild beast to trample your hardwook, you'd also curse too. If it were one or two, Richmond would just laugh and wave his hands, and the enemies would be blown out of his zone. In fact, most monsters knew better than to enter this zone, as it belonged to a powerful being. However, their hatred for Draco was indescribable. This wasn't due to the normal aggro effect. If Draco had relied on that, every now and then his train of monsters would decrease from enemies giving up the chase. He had done something unprecedented. When he entered the zone, he sneaked around till he entered one of the orc camps. He then entered the hut of the chieftain's daughter and well, no need to enter specifics. Orcs are pretty open with these things, especially towards humans, and the young female orc didn't hold back with her sounds, so the whole village found out soon enough. When the chieftain and queen mother realized their soon-to-be betrothed daughter had been soiled by a human, it incited a rage that could not be described. If it were just once, it wouldn't be this bad. But with all the enemies behind him from almost every camp and settlement in the forest after him, well, suffice to say Draco could issue a challenge to Hugh Hefner. There were no feelings involved, for him it was just business. With his speed, it was a pipe dream for the chasing enemies to catch up to him. In fact, he was purposely slowing himself down to give them that illusion. Whenever he saw a new camp, he would speed up and get down to business before escaping. Really, the only ones with positive feelings about Draco in the whole forest were the chieftain's daughters, who would forever remember the well-endowed and handsome human. "Listen here, boy, I command you in the name of Lord Richmond the Great, father of the modern age and pioneer of the future, to commit suicide so that these beasts can leave my sanctuary," Richmond shouted while casting non-stop. Draco almost spat blood. "Commit suicide? You're not even struggling with them, just waving your arms to scatter them about." In fact, there was a glint in Richmond's eye that said he was thoroughly enjoying bullying these monsters. Richmond the Great's personality was one of the greatest topics in Draco's past life. He was known as a womanizer and a tyrant. Players who encountered him without something good would find themselves played with until he was satisfied. Females who entered his zone would be harassed until they left. Still, people came here willing because Richmond always gave out something good based on how much of a good time he had. Some of these things were uncommon skill books, advanced trade skill books, and rare weapons and armor. For magical classes, he may teach rare spells, and for rune makers, he would gift runes that were ancient. With such rewards, who cared if he used you as a basketball and dunked you in the lake? Who cared if he peeked under your skirt while giving lewd remarks and chuckling dirtily? Just endure and get your reward afterwards. Draco didn't have time to be bullied, so he substituted himself with the monsters of the zonal area. With how much fun Richmond was having, Draco simply sat down and recovered his spent stamina. He watched with mild sympathy as these proud and semi-intelligent monsters were dressed up like dollies and made to act out lewd plays. Richmond was one twisted old man. Soon enough, he ended his torment with a sigh of utter contentment. If Draco didn't know any better, he'd believe that Richmond had received a godly massage. Well then boy, you sure made this old man go through a lot of stress in dealing with those brutes for you. Sigh, at my age I should have a fleet of beautiful young girls rubbing my feet while I bask in the sun. He puffed out a ring of smoke from his pipe as his eyes glazed over in reverie. Draco kept his indignation in check. After all, he more than anyone knew how shameless old man Richmond was. Arguing with him would end up with you losing in the end. Ah, forget it. I am Richmond the Great, father of the modern age and pioneer of the future. A man such as myself should be forgiving and understanding towards snot-nosed brats who can't even count past 0. Yes, such is the nature of my existence. Sigh, what will the world do without me? I fear to even think it. Draco couldn't take it anymore. He fell to his knees and spat blood while trying to curse in anger, but only blood came out. His soul and spirit were heavily damaged by Richmond's words, causing this reaction. The old mage himself seemed to not notice the effect of his words as he continued praising himself and belittling Draco. Eventually, Draco managed to calm himself and get to the point of his visit. With a grimace of pain, he took on a whiny voice. Lord Richmond the Great, father of the modern age and pioneer of the future, this young lad's name is Draco. I thank you for showing me your greatness earlier, I shall surely remember it for the rest of my life. I only wish I could gain even 0.1% of your greatness through inheritance. I would be able to die in peace under a statue I'll build of you in the world's largest temple. It has to be said that Draco was a cunning bastard. His eloquent and carefully chosen words were the ambrosia to Richmond's overly bloated ego. In fact, it could be said that in Draco's past life and for the eternity of this life, no one would be able to string together words that would move Richmond like this. Richmond had the world's largest smile on right now, and if it could, his grin would stretch across his whole skull. He laughed and caressed his beard, feeling sparkly from Draco's words. The old man was pleased beyond words and developed a liking for this foolish young boy who knew what was good in life. Boy, you are definitely blessed by the heavens to be able to recognize my greatness. Such a boy like you deserves more than being a mere side character in the story that is called life, where I'm the protagonist. As of today, I shall make you one of the minor main characters. Take this. Richmond threw a small vial towards Draco, which he caught clumsily as if he were a bumbling youth. He checked the description of the item and felt satisfied at heart, but he wasn't done yet. He was going to kill this man from overblown ego and take all his stuff. If he didn't die, then Draco would continue receiving goods until Richmond got fed up. Lord Richmond. Such an item for someone as meager as me? Wait, Lord Richmond, this kind of item could have whole kingdoms embroil in a 100-year war and the winning party wouldn't even dare use it, but keep it as an heirloom. Lord Richmond, you can give this out easily. Does that mean you are more powerful than all the kingdoms in the world? What a great man. I'm blessed to see your very shadow. Richmond laughed happily. He was really developing a strong positive feeling towards this young boy. His words were truer than even the laws of the universe. Richmond felt that it would be necessary to develop this young boy into his herald so that he may spread his own greatness to the world. After all, very few had such perceiving eyes to see the truth of life. Boy, I shall make you my herald so that you may spread tales of my greatness to the ignorant in the world. How about it? Draco pretended to be stunned, but inwardly he was cursing. What herald? What greatness? This old man was just a deadbeat pervert with good stuff. Who cares about spreading his name? But Draco knew he was in a bind, so he looked hesitant and said, really? My lord would let a foolish boy like me be his herald? Wouldn't I bring disgrace to your great name? Of course not. This old man wouldn't let you become his herald without giving you anything. Take a look at what being a herald entails. With a wave of his hand, a panel appeared before Draco. Richmond's basic herald pack. 1 herald's badge. 1 herald's cloak. Herald's badge, unique item. A herald's badge is a special identification token that grants various powers to the individual wearing depending on the ranking and status of their master. Minimum rank requirement to grant a herald's badge is rank 3. Effects, scale with tier. Minor diplomatic immunity. Permanent 50% discount at all rank 1 and 2 shops. Granted lord rank in all kingdoms with neutral reputation towards master. Granted passage to rare and epic tier adventurers guild controlled dungeons. No teleportation fees to towns and cities in positive aligned kingdoms towards master. Herald's cloak, unique item. A herald's cloak is a special identification garb that grants various powers to the individual wearing depending on the ranking and status of their master. Minimum rank requirement to grant a herald's cloak is rank 3. Appearance deception, 1 form. Movement speed out of combat, 500%. Blink, 500 feet, cooldown 30 seconds. Total invisibility, 10 seconds, cooldown 30 seconds. Draco sucked in a cold breath of air when he saw what being Richmond's herald entailed. Any of these effects were almost impossible to get from any other source. Heck, it was almost as if Draco had wasted his time killing Ratchet with this in hand. What made his blood run cold was the fact that this was all assuming Richmond was a rank 3 mage king. If he was even a rank 4 mage emperor, these boons would increase exponentially. Richmond puffed out a circle of smoke and enjoyed the bafflement of Draco. It should be noted that 15 years of struggle and supremacy had made Draco develop a monstrous poker face that was almost impossible to see through. Not even the riveting knight of this timeline had mastered it as well as he had. However, Richmond was an existence that was beyond monstrous, so Draco's ploys had all been seen through. Lord Richmond the Great, may I ask what rank you are? Draco asked with an audible gulp. Richmond smirked and poked a hole in a puff of smoke he blew out, turning it into the shape of a voluptuous woman. Accept my heraldry, equip my items and you'll see. Of course, Draco didn't need to ask an NPC before checking their tier. After all, Boundless was still an MMO, so it was easy to check the health, mana, and level of players and NPCs. However, Richmond's details came as a slew of question marks, which meant he was too high for Draco to see. That was understandable, as to give these items he had to be at least rank 3 whereas Draco was rank 0. Draco pondered for a bit before accepting gracefully. From his point of view, there was no loss to this. The boons on these 2 items were equivalent to wearing 2 epic rank items. Who could resist such a temptation? When he equipped them, a special title was granted him. Richmond's Herald, special rank. Mana capacity 100%. Mana recovery 100%. Skill cooldowns lowered by 50%. Richmond was a gift that kept on giving. Draco breathed in hard and sighed. At this point, nothing could surprise him anymore. He decided to check Richmond's rank before leaving to complete his objective. Name, Lord Richmond, rank 7 Mage God. Level, 397. HP, 100,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000. A part of his sanity was forever lost to the abyss due to this. Richmond looked over in sympathy. Not everyone could view his greatness and remain sane. It was precisely the reason he had decided to live in a quiet place away from the world. All right, old fart, no need for me to pretend anymore. Why me? Draco regained composure almost immediately and stared at Richmond coldly. Richmond looked at him with approval and sat up. You already know why. Draco did. How long? Richmond sighed and threw away his pipe. About 3 years give or take. Draco silently thought for a bit before nodding. It shall be done. Richmond waved his arms and Draco was teleported away by a few hundred kilometers, a distance that would take almost 3 hours for a car at full speed to cross. He didn't ask where Draco was going, as the spell would link to his mind and take him where he wanted to go. Richmond stood under the fractured sunlight from under the canopy and sighed again. Chapter 7, Setting Up Shop. Draco coalesced in a grassland that seemed almost endless. With a sigh, he thought back to everything that had occurred with a weary smile. I didn't think killing Ratchet would have such far-reaching effects. That last conversation with Richmond might seem cryptic to a bystander, but Draco understood it perfectly. Richmond didn't give him the heraldry to spread his fame. After all, that old man chose such a remote location to hide himself from the problems of the world. Why would he want to attract worldly trouble in that case? No, Richmond was a rank 7 mage god. He was one of the hidden powers who Draco had been thinking would take note of his actions, and he had. But by giving him the heraldry and letting him see his true power, Richmond was telling Draco that every action had a consequence. Forget Mephisto, there were thousands of others who had taken undue interest in him, and these people would be knocking on his door soon. Richmond gifted the heraldry to give him a way to protect himself until he was strong enough to deal with the monsters who lived in the darkness. Draco himself knew of a few. After all, he had been one of the 2 ultimate powers in Sturgehaven Kingdom in his past life. His victory over Darkrow was precisely due to the help of one of the hidden powers. Just one of them was enough to upset the stalemate war between 2 ultimate powers, so that alone is a good indicator of their power. With Richmond's heraldry, he was safe from majority of these fellows, as they wouldn't easily enter conflict with a rank 7 mage god who had almost reached the pinnacle. But that didn't mean they wouldn't get to do it. These old monsters would have their underlings who were either at Draco's level, or slightly higher within reason, challenge him in order to offset Richmond's anger. Draco losing to them would be due to his own weakness, and Richmond couldn't retaliate due to that. In fact, Draco had no idea that Mephisto was preparing hurdles of a similar nature to test Draco and help him grow. With a sigh, Draco put it out of his mind. He had other objectives to fulfill in the meantime, and brooding over this wouldn't do much to help. He observed the plane he was on carefully. Then, Draco removed a few items he had purchased from the market before leaving stagnant Mosstown. He began to carefully place them based on his memories and calculations. When he finished, he sighed and faced the western end of the plain. With a frown, he traversed forward for about an hour before he saw a very small town that had a palisade as its only defense. Draco activated appearance deception, 9 forms, which allowed him to create a new avatar in the character creation menu. It was only valid as long as the skill was active, so Draco styled himself as a handsome roguelike fellow, similar to Han Solo. With that done, he crossed the town's border and entered it truly. The first thing he was met with was weapons suddenly pointed at his face. Despite the pointy ends aimed at his face, Draco smiled wryly. A dainty pale-skinned woman with eye-catching fiery red hair came from the depths of the sudden weapon storm with a wary smile on her face. She had 2 beauty spots on her lip and her cheek, and her thin pink lips were twitching subtly. She wore a traveler's garb of linens and had a bag of holding attached to her waist. "Hello, adventurer, welcome to our little settlement. May I ask what your objective is?" Her voice was smooth as silk and very pleasant to the ear. It was very disarming, coupled with her willowy form and feminine posture. She invoked the feeling to protect from those who looked upon her, a natural defense. Draco simply smiled and didn't answer. Instead, he chose to observe each of the people arrayed before him with weapons pointed at his face. They were all a mismatch of races and colors, most of them being young adu.l.ts rather than children or middle-aged folks. Each of the hands holding a weapon was trembling, yet there was a firmness in their eyes that belied their fear. These people were scared shitless, but would fight rather than run. My lord adventurer. Her voice was slightly hitched, as if she was worried he'd take offense from being questioned twice. Draco shook his head. You are all not going to win against the savages like this. His casual admission was like a thunderbolt striking the ground right beside all the people in front of him. Their previously firm gazes wavered and the fear displayed itself. The pale woman found a way to become even paler from Draco's words and her breathing stopped. Draco sighed and made a shrugging gesture. But then, I came. With that line delivered, he walked by them and entered a building that looked like an inn, although it was roughly built and looked somewhat new. Draco's movement was casual, but to these people, they didn't even see him move. To them, he just spoke and disappeared behind them, right in front of their eyes. Draco's movement speed out of combat wasn't something normal humans could perceive, not with Lord Richmond's boons. Their alarm could no longer be described with words. Draco's sudden appearance, words, and power was the same as living in a small room with a clock spider. They had no idea of his intentions, but his lack of action so far at least told that he wasn't hostile, yet. Truthfully, these people weren't always so hostile to outsiders. In fact, this community was a frontier group that had been commissioned by the Adventurers Guild to explore untamed lands and verify if they could be safely settled upon. When they first settled, everything seemed perfect. This region was lush with resources, and the amount of minerals and metal veins found just underneath the settlement alone made it a gold mine. If the Adventurers Guild could tame and lay claim to this land, their prospects would grow endlessly. But if it were so simple, then why hadn't Sturgehaven Kingdom taken this land already but left it up for grabs? The reason was simple: there was someone here already. These indigenous people were seemingly typical savages, with a different language, a violent and xenophobic nature, and weird, barbaric customs. They had whittled down the frontier group over the years until they were barely shell of what they were before. These frontier people weren't fighters, only prospectors. Their fighting force had long expired under the continued assaults, leaving these young scholars and travelers to fend for themselves. This experience had hardened them somewhat, but it was a pipe dream to think they'd become fierce tigers under this assault. If mental strength could be obtained from conflict so easily, PTSD wouldn't exist. Draco sat at a counter reviewing all the information he had on this particular event in his head. He didn't even waste his breath pretending to not know what was going on. He had more knowledge about the happenings leading up to this as well as what would even occur on the future. This particular quest was known as the War of Attrition. Any player could trigger this quest, but it was limited to guilds only. Only a strong guild with members willing to kamikaze themselves could overcome the savages in the area and gain a slight foothold in the frontier. The reward? Land. What else could incentivize a guild to sacrifice its fighting force so easily? Whether it was in Boundless or the real world, land would always be the most valuable commodity, more so in a region like this with rich resources and no clear overlord. But this land title would only be valid as long as the Adventurers Guild was willing to give it. It was a pipe dream to think a player guild could match the force of the Adventurers Guild within the first 10 years of Boundless. Draco came here without a guild and without the blessing of the Adventurers Guild, yet his chances of success was higher than both of the guilds from his past life. The mistake the guild players of old made was that they tried to take a side in this war, obviously against the indigenes who have a home field advantage. No one stopped to wonder why they had managed to keep this land over the countless years it has existed, why the monsters here know to keep their head under the water and stay in their zones. The fatal mistake was that they had underestimated the so-called savages, only taking their superficial representation as fact. It wasn't until almost 3 years of constant war and losses did one ordinary player who had deserted find a tunnel that led underground. What was underground? A beautiful city that spanned thousands of kilometers. The sheer amount of savages there surpassed the total population of Sturgehaven Kingdom. In fact, The spies sent there afterwards found that the war above ground was seen as a training event for the young to get some battle experience. The indigenes had never taken them seriously. This was a true war of attrition, where both sides had vast numbers and a lot of manpower, but no real progress was being made. At best, a victory here would be Pyrrhic. Draco wasn't here to help the Adventurers Guild or the indigenes. He was here to help himself, plain and simple. The easiest way to be involved in a war yet profit from it was, you guessed it, weapons trading. That was why Draco purchased a whole slew of items from players who felt they were trash tier. To parties in a war, common weapons were slightly above standard. No one was going to equip their infantry with anything other than trash tier swords. After all, if you died, the enemy can harvest it and use it against you. Bringing a common weapon to a fight with trash tier weapons is the boundless equivalent of bring a gun to a knife fight. Draco would even have preferred to visit a few more towns to purchase items, but most players would have sold theirs by now. It was the first thing majority of them would do anyway. The door to the inn opened and the delicate woman along with a nerdy-looking guy in glasses walked up to Draco with forced smiles. "My lord adventurer, we are pleased to host you. I hope everything is to your liking." Draco didn't even look at them. To keep up the facade of an uninterested and mysterious party was an easy task, because that was Draco in his default state. "It is." His simple answer contained a simple meaning, yet to those hearing it, it seemed, well, boundless. "Ah, that's great then," she replied with a worried glance towards her partner. The skinny nerd pushed up his glasses and spoke with a firm tone, firmer than anyone he'd seen so far. "What do you want here? You're either here to sell weapons or you're from the guild to observe our progress." The woman beside him gripped his sleeve tightly and gave a frightened expression from her compatriot's sharp and provocative words. For the first time since coming, Draco turned to face this man and truly looked at him. "What is your name?" "Anguis. I'm the leader of the frontier group here." "Yours?" Draco was so startled that he chuckled. The AI for Boundless Shore was twisted. The two people before him looked to each other in confusion. What had Anguis said that would warrant such an amused laugh? "Forgive me. My name is Drake," Draco replied with a wry smile. Anguis was also startled, but then smiled self-deprecatingly. "I see why you chortled." The two didn't elaborate further, so the woman beside Anguis was clueless as to what went on. "My name is Sasha. I am Anguis' sister and his vice leader. It is nice to be acquainted with you, Lord Drake." Sasha did look a bit similar to Anguis, so Draco didn't doubt it. He decided to examine them and see what level they were at currently. Name, Anguis, rank 1 rune maker. Level, 15. HP, 4000/4000. Name, Sasha, rank 1 scribe. Level, 13. HP, 3400/3400. Rank 1 trade skill classes. Anguis was a rune maker and Sasha was a scribe. Clearly, these two were not suited for anything related to combat, but life wasn't fair to everyone in equal measure. Even though they were one rank above Draco, he could easily end them before they could call for help. After all, his gear alone was enough to make these people wary. That was one of the many reasons they had been polite with him so far. To answer your question, yes. I am here to sell weapons and set up a distribution outlet here for you guys in the war effort. I will also hire out my services occasionally in exchange for certain resources. I wonder if there is any empty land I could purchase here for my shop. Like the real world, shops could be opened to sell a variety of goods. Draco was going to open a shop in this frontier town to distribute weapons, armor, and potions which would net him a profit. Of course, what he wasn't telling Anguis and Sasha was that he'd do same for the savages. This was a war he had nothing to do with, so he wasn't interested in who was right or wrong, just how much he could make off it. He was also interested in taking a portion of the wild land here to develop his new empire, starting with his new guild. But that was a bit away from now, so he focused on the steps leading up to it. Anguis and Sasha revealed startled expressions as first, then wary joy. Such a thing was too good to be true. They were far from the only frontier town out here, and the guild had already pretty much deemed them a failed expedition. There was nothing but the label of deserter awaiting them if they tried to leave too, so they were stuck fighting till they either died or won. Over the years, the guild had consistently furnished them with fighting forces and resources, but they had made absolutely no headway, only taking losses throughout. Hence, Draco's offer was exactly what they needed more than anything. One thing they had in abundance was coins and resources. After all, this area was a gold mine. However, they had no way to easily transport it out, so only the rarest materials were taken back. The people here were paid wages, but what use was that in this estranged society? The food that was produced was made through everyone's hard work, so no one could claim the right to sell it. Since they were all individuals with trade skills, they lacked no services or goods. What use was giving the tailor coins for patching your garment when he would never be able to leave this dead zone to spend it? But with Draco bringing in fresh goods that were necessary and especially which there was currently no supply, their stockpile of money could finally regain use. This town could regain life and, more importantly, a fighting chance. My Lord Drake, we wouldn't ask you to pay for land here. After all, do we even own any title? You can select any empty lot and place your store there, and we shall patronize your goods. Sasha exclaimed excitedly, giving in to her optimism. Yeah, just set up shop anywhere. We have some builders here who'd be able to set something up for you. I don't know what they'd take as compensation though. Anguis added with a wry smile. Draco nodded. He didn't expect anyone to work for him for free, just getting the land alone was his only concern. After all, despite Sasha's claim, this was undoubtedly their land. They just didn't have the ability to protect it. If they did, they would knock on his door for rent or title deeds. They might seem like nice people now, but that was only because they were desperate. I'll have to trouble you all then. Gather 5 rank 1 builders and tell them I'd pay in anything they need from outside for the construction of my shop. Sasha nodded happily. No problem, my lord. Anguis however frowned. Sounds like you don't plan on staying to see it built. Draco smiled thinly. This Anguis fellow was too perceptive, able to see the hidden meaning in words and actions. He was a lot like Draco was during his relationship with Riveting Knight. No longer naive and cowardly, but slightly sharp and observant, yet still physically underwhelming. Sasha frowned at Anguis for his sharp words after noticing Draco's expression. Even Anguis felt that he might have stepped out of line. After all, this man would be their benefactor soon. He just had a feeling. Actually, forget it, what you do is your business. Is there anything you need us to do in the meanwhile? Anguis asked with a slight scowl. Nothing for now. When the shop is complete, I will know. For now, I need to go gather resources and inform my superiors that we can expand here. Draco replied while turning to leave the establishment. His nonchalant answer made Anguis look bad, as it seemed he was being overly suspicious of Draco. Sasha soon made that dissatisfaction known as she harangued her big brother till he covered his ears. Draco himself had already selected his plot of land for the shop and had spoken to the people who would construct it. He had already bought a basic shop design from the Merchants Guild for 200 gold, which was a noticeable dent in his early game funds. He stood at the edge of the plane he had originally teleported into and activated appearance deception, 9 forms again. His second form he made into a tall, robust male who was dark-skinned and handsome, with features slightly similar to his real self. He also changed his outfit to what he remembered the indigenes wore, cotton shirts and khaki shorts with sandals. After making sure he looked the part, he made his way to his next target, the town the indigenes used to mobilize troops to the surface. Chapter 8, Zane. Draco took less than an hour to reach his destination while walking casually. If he had sprinted the whole way, it would have taken him less than 10 minutes. The reason he didn't was because he wanted to give himself time to think. Even with how apathetic Draco was, he was from an era where NPCs were respected as unique beings. Unlike players, when they died it was for good. A guild of players could afford to kamikaze themselves because they were able to respawn. The ones fighting in this conflict wouldn't. Draco was conflicted. He was evil, but that was only because he was doing everything to gain revenge. He justified all his actions based on his hatred. Here, he had no such thing. If he really fanned the flames of this war by profiteering, he would indirectly be the cause of a lot of deaths. Other players wouldn't bat an eye at this stage, but he was different. Draco sighed and decided that what would be would be. Everyone had their places in life and some had their destinies in the body pit of a battleground. Whether he was here or not wouldn't change the outcome, just the rapidity of it. Draco looked to the huts that were arrayed before him. These so-called savages intentionally portrayed that front to outsiders in order to deceive them. Their underground city might not lose to even gnomish and dwarven kingdoms in terms of advancement. The huts were of the ancient African design, with mud walls and a roof made of thick tree branches. Carved into the sides of these circular huts was a square opening that served as a window. The settlement wasn't large, barely bigger than a village. In terms of size, it lost out to the frontier town. However, Draco dared not underestimate them. Wherever there was a village, there was a passage underground. Each underground passage had a military outpost connected to it, so reinforcements could quickly be sent above in case of a siege. In fact, between the two parties it could be said that the indigenes needed Draco's weapons deal slightly less. However, Draco was confident he'd be well received. The reason was because he knew something from his past life that no one today did. Like with any society, especially an advanced one like the indigenes, there would always be internal conflicts stemming from cultural and political origins. The frontier town had it hard, thinking they were estranged from the world, but still received resources from the guild except manpower. The indigenes on the surface had a reverse situation. There were always new youths being sent up to fight and gain some experience, but they were left to feed themselves on the surface. Not even a knife was given them on the journey up top. This is the only reason why, despite the overwhelming numbers of the indigenes, the frontiersmen haven't been eradicated. To them, Draco coming to giving them weapons would be the deal breaker in this war, assuming Draco was a fool. After all, should the indigenes drive out the frontiers people, he would have no way to settle here. His supplies may be useful to the native youths on the surface, but the authorities down below could care less on the matter of what he could supply. The frontiersmen would receive top-quality weapons, armor, and consumables as well as some mercenary forces to even the tide and prolong the war. The indigenes would be given passable quality items that wouldn't grant them any advantages. When Draco entered the range of the settlement, various gazes were trained on him. The various youths eyed him with wariness, interest, and even open hostility. After all, it was obvious Draco wasn't part of this particular community, although he was one of their race. There was an unspoken competition between each of the villages on who could conquer their respective frontier town, hence the distrust. Still, there was no rule stating each community was autonomous, so nothing could stop Draco from entering. After walking through the area, he gained a rough idea of the forces here, as well as their strengths and lackings. Seeing the newcomer doing nothing but observing their outpost, the natives here became even more hostile. Draco was acting like nothing more than a spy. Despite the fact that they couldn't kick him out, nothing stopped the natives from entering conflicts on the surface. After all, they had been estranged from below, so no one would be coming up unless there was the threat of total annihilation. Hence, a tall and robust youth with a rough and scary visage marked by scars stood in Draco's path along with 4 or so other fellows. Immediately, the crowd started chattering in excitement and apprehension. Some felt that Draco should be beaten and thrown out, while others felt that the real enemy was out there, so why were they fighting among themselves? Leave. The brutish fellow stated in a rough voice. He didn't introduce himself or ask who or why Draco was here. Naturally, Draco ignored him to the point where even some spectators felt that the presence of the half-giant man was a mirage. Seeing that the one he was looking down upon had ignored him so thoroughly, his expression darkened. With a snort, he spoke in a cold voice. Pipsqueak, I'll give you 3 seconds to turn around and leave before I make you. Some of the crowd gulped audibly. They all knew him, he was one of the strongest fighters of their hamlet, Kwaku. His strength was only surpassed by their chieftain, meaning he was a monstrous existence. Seeing that Kwaku wanted to cause trouble for the intruder made some worry, while others gloated in schadenfreude. Still, despite his threat, Draco still pretended that he didn't exist. This caused Kwaku's anger to reach a boiling point. With a roar, he leapt at Draco while punching out with full force, aiming to cripple the blind fool before him. Despite that, his fist met only air. Where Draco stood before was devoid of any living being. With a surprised grunt, he traced his target to further down the road. Everyone viewing the event sucked in a breath of air. They were all seasoned combatants, unlike the frontiersmen, so they could easily see Draco move by Kwaku's punch as if it wasn't there. To a normal person's eyes, Draco just walked right through Kwaku's body, but in fact, that was his afterimage from just walking steadily. Just walking. It was obvious to everyone that should Draco have wished to retaliate, even kill Kwaku, he'd be dead by now. This realization made Kwaku's expression become sullen as he glared angrily at Draco's back. Yet, he didn't attempt to hinder him anymore. The strength difference between the two had been set. Trying to accost him further would be no different than slapping the Grim Reaper awake during his nice nap. Now, the residents became even more curious as to Draco's purpose here. So far, he hadn't uttered a word, just casually observing the ambience of the village. After a few minutes, he finally turned around and stared straight at the crowd that had been tailing him in curio. His sudden movement made all of them take a few steps back in apprehension. They weren't cowards by nature, but seeing that not even Kwaku was his match, they weren't fit to even clean the morsels between Draco's teeth. If Draco did decide to battle them all, only their ancestors could guess how many would fall. After staring at them for a few seconds, Draco smirked and finally spoke for the first time, baffling everyone in the village. How long are you planning to remain in hiding? Everyone revealed a questioning look towards Draco's strange words. Kwaku's brows furrowed before his eyes narrowed suddenly. With a snort, he crossed his arms and stared right where Draco was looking. Not understanding Kwaku's action, many eyes followed his gaze too. On the side of a mud hut, a body slowly detached and walked to the fore of the indigenes. The muddy-toned skin rapidly morphed into a lovely caramel shade, revealing a woman who could only be described as fierce yet mind-blowing. She was about as tall as Draco with toned muscles on display since her attire was essentially a cotton sports bra and shorts. She wouldn't look too out of place in a gym or a boxing ring. Her hair was short and curly, her eyes a light shade of brown, her lips slightly thick and crimson red. To describe her as voluptuous. Not enough. Draco, with all his mental strength, felt goosebumps from the sheer beauty of her proportions. This was the kind of thing you'd see in a 3D game with heavily sex.u.a.list females, not real life. Not even surgery could create this kind of perfect distribution in Draco's opinion. The worst part was that she wasn't wearing anything underneath, meaning her N.I.P.P.L.Es and camel toe were on display. Her tight and thin material attire left nothing to imagination except maybe coloring. Draco noticed that he wasn't the only one with this reaction. In fact, all the men around had lost focus, only staring at this woman's form as if it were the only thing in the world. Some of the weaker ones had tents in their shorts while others were drooling. Only Kwaku and Draco fought with their hormones and instincts to remain staring at her face. Even some of the girls were watching the woman hungrily, showing that they had a variety of orientations outside the norm. The woman's eyebrows raised from Draco's resilience. She fully expected him to be weak-minded, unable to resist her natural form. Seeing that he had such strong will, she became serious. In this land, the only person she was wary of was Kwaku. Now another one had appeared. "You have good eyes," she said simply, her voice neither deep nor light, but standing in between. Her accent was also heavier than the others, sounding distinctly African to Draco's ears. Draco was also able to see that her remark wasn't simple. She was indirectly lauding him for doing what others failed to do, keep his eyes to himself. Though Draco wasn't going to take the moral high ground against the others, because there was definitely something going on with this woman's charm. Draco guessed she might be part succubus. After all, human devil offspring were a normal sight, especially succubus and incubus offspring. It would also explain her natural camouflage ability. "I am here to negotiate for land. I wish to sell weapons, armor, and potions to the fighters here," Draco squeezed out with effort, adding in an empty smile. This shocked the gathered viewers so strongly that they forgot to ogle the woman. She herself revealed a wide-eyed gaze, and even Kwaku had his jaws drop. Sell weapons and armor? Was there really such a thing? Give it. Give it now. Who in their right minds would refuse? Having a supply of weapons and armor would not only lower the mortality rate but increase the oppression on their targeted frontier town. The sooner they squashed them, the greater their rewards and standing in society, individually as well as collectively. They were one of the bottom-rung outposts up here, but with this, the various youths assembled couldn't help but fantasize. Ah! Their ancestors were really watching over them to send such a boon. They swore to add more offerings during their next visit to the tombs. The voluptuous woman was the first to recover, and Kwaku soon followed after. The two of them observed Draco seriously before the woman spoke again. "We have no qualms letting you sell here, but trade requires currency. When leaving the homeland, we didn't bring any of our pasewas. Also, may I inquire upon your supplier?" Her questions once again snapped everyone out of their daze, for they were crucial. How would they compensate Draco for his wares, and more importantly, he was one of them on the surface and should have an outpost of his own. Why would he supply them with weapons instead of the bigger outposts or even his own village? Apprehension made itself known on their faces. Coupled with Draco's suspicious activities when he first entered the town, it seemed more like a prelude to an invasion than a business venture expansion. Draco didn't blame them, but he was surprised at how sharp this woman was. He had already long guessed that she was the true leader here, and her actions have affirmed that. Draco frowned inwardly. Both the frontier town and the natives' village had extremely intelligent leaders, so how were they at the bottom? Probably circuitous and fate. With Draco's supplies, he could see these two towns taking the highlight of this war easily. "I would take the currency of these frontiers people. I have great use for it in building a platform to invade their lands. My supplies come from harvesting the spoils of war from more affluent towns. We also found some supply trains on their way to restock their destinations, so we do not lack supplies. Is that good enough?" With such an explanation, they could only acquiesce. Most of those who felt endangered relaxed and even felt envy. To strike gold like that, how lucky! Some too felt awe from Draco's assertion that he planned to assault the lands of the invaders. Excitement brimmed in their hearts. Who that was on the defensive didn't want to take the fight to their assailants? The only one with some measure of distrust still lingering in their eyes was the woman who was in charge, but she hid it well. Still, Draco easily caught onto it, and he frowned inwardly. First Anguis, now this woman. Was he that distrustful? He wasn't even using his real face. "Thank you for clarifying. We will help you construct your shop for a fee." How soon can you open business? She went straight into the heart of the matter, not wasting time with any superfluous words. Draco found that he rather felt this woman was pleasing. Down to earth and not the type to talk unnecessarily. As soon as the shop is ready. Here is the design. Of course, while they may be combatants, there were definitely utility classes here who could easily handle the building of the shop. As an afterthought, Draco decided to analyze Kwaku and the woman before him. Name, Kwaku, rank 1 barbarian adventurer. Level, 17. HP, 10,000/10,000. Name, Zane, rank 1 fighter adventurer. Level, 19. HP, 8,000/8,000. Draco's eyebrows rose in surprise. Despite being able to fight both of them, he wouldn't have it easy at all, even with his skill. Just Kwaku's health alone was enough to rival a lieutenant rank monster. It was also a fact that between NPCs and monsters, NPCs of the same rank have an advantage over monsters. Draco left the town after making sure the construction was underway. There was very little he could add to the progress, as he didn't choose the builder trade skill. Instead, he walked deeper into the region until he came across a cave that was hidden inside a mountain. He observed this cave carefully for traps or other inhabitants. Finding that it was clear, Draco sighed in relief. In fact, this wasn't a natural cave but something made by a powerful being who lived here in seclusion for a while. As such, the place was remote and best of all, had rooms for alchemy, smithing, and even hygiene. This was going to be Draco's base for the duration of the war, where he'd create weapons and armor as well as brew potions for sale. The amount of resources he had were staggering. He had already bought some potions to add to the weapons and armor sets he bought from players, which would be a part of his first wave of goods. By the time those sold out, he have a few sets of his own handcrafted products done. Killing 2 birds with 1 stone, earn skill levels and money at the same time was his goal. With that in mind, Draco began renovation. He had work to do. Chapter 9, Dragon Soul. In another part of the world, Richmond was smoking a pipe and enjoying himself when a loud booming voice echoed across his glade. F.U.C.K. Boy Richmond, roll out here and die for Daddy Nakayu. Richmond sighed and put everything away. He knew that some ill.U.S.Trius characters would come barging into his haven after taking that boy under his protection, but he didn't expect the first one to be the most arduous to deal with. Nakayu was well known for his bizarre behavior. Normally when one gained power, they would look down on everyone and try to oppress or bully those weaker than themselves. This idiot, however, was the inverse. Nakayu took perverse pleasure in bullying those stronger than him, especially the hidden powers of the world. Unfortunately, Nakayu wasn't a typical resident of this part of the world. He was a cultivator from the Xiangxia section of Boundless, which hadn't been released to the public yet. As such, he had a weird physique as well as hard to defend against moves that gave all the hidden powers headaches. Nakayu wasn't as strong as them on paper, since each section of Boundless had different rules. The sci-fi section had its own physics, the Western fantasy also had its own, and the Wuxia section too was unique. His abilities were converted over into a form that would suit the laws of the fantasy realm, giving the hidden powers a slight advantage. However, Nakayu was physically invincible due to his immortal arts, so killing him was impossible. Mephisto was his favorite target. A few thousand years ago, Nakayu had broken his way into the Devil Realm and bullied Mephisto for almost a millennium, giving him a deep-seated trauma and fear. Thinking like that, Richmond realized he was in for quite the experience today. Nakayu, lad. Why don't you swallow this pill here? I know you immortals love your pills. This one would boost your powers exponentially, Richmond replied while presenting a red pellet to Nakayu. The item gleamed with a potent glow, telling of an intense power held within. However, Nakayu just laughed. Old bastard Richmond, your mother. You take me for a fool? That pill has all the most hazardous and dangerous contents known to man. Your flimsy illusion spell cannot cover its murderous aura to your daddy here. Richmond shrugged and cancelled the masking spell, making the attractive red pill turn into a black pellet that could kill a rank 4 emperor just by inhaling its odor. He had smashed everything harmful to living organisms he could access into this thing, hoping it could at least give Nakayu a stomachache. That way, Richmond would be able to slowly find a combination of toxins that could finally rid the world of this pest. What do you want, Nakayu? Richmond asked with exasperation. I see you took that brat under your wing. Richmond. You old fool. Did you really think doing so could protect him from me? Let me tell you, I fear no one. I could flatten that boy into paste regardless of consequence and crush his immortal spirit so he'd be unable to reincarnate. Nakayu laughed arrogantly. But if you agree to fight me for 300 rounds and win, I agree to leave your disciple alone. What do you say? Nakayu asked with a devilish smile. No. Richmond answered simply. No. Nakayu asked dumbly. No. Richmond answered finally. Nakayu blinked in surprise for a few seconds, then nodded. Okay then, I shall take my leave. However, just as he turned to leave, his form suddenly blurred before disappearing. When he reformed, he was right behind Richmond. Haha. F.U.C.K. Boy Richmond, stand there and experience nirvana. Nakayu laughed while throwing a sucker punch. Reincarnation Cycle Fist. An image of a will appeared behind Nakayu as he thrust his right hand forward. The will began to spin slowly, picking up speed as his hand neared Richmond's body. When he was inches away from landing his powerful blow, the will had practically created a tornado with its rapid rotation before sinking into Nakayu's fist. Seconds away from contact, Richmond finally responded. With a casual flick of his wrist, a transparent azure carapace-like mana shield formed around him. The moment Nakayu's powerful reincarnation cycle fist connected with the barrier, it seemed like it would crack. Seeing this reaction, the assailant couldn't help the evil smile that came upon his face. The very thought of bullying a powerhouse like Richmond till he became traumatized, he was so excited he could shout. But his dreams were destined to be crushed and teabagged when Richmond's shield endured the massive weight of his fist before bouncing back. The moment it did so, Nakayu discovered the power of reflection and rebound force. It seemed Richmond's shield had a special property, it could absorb immense kinetic energy and process it to deal double damage back. And the recipient of this recoil was none other than Nakayu himself. Since the reincarnation cycle fist was one of his most powerful moves, it was effectively the same as two versions of himself hitting him at max power. Nakayu was blown away like a rag doll. Richmond soon followed after to punish this ingrate. F.U.C.K. Nakayu swore while wobbling on the spot. To describe him as on the brink of death would be an understatement. In fact, if it wasn't for the weird physique of cultivators, he'd long be 6 feet under. As it were, he felt like the planet had rolled over him twice. With his robes torn and ragged as well as 2 black circles around his eyes, Nakayu was the image of pitiful. Richmond, however, looked as good as new. Yet, he was cursing inwardly. It seemed that Nakayu had once again become stronger. Before, it took him but a few minutes to get him to this state. Now, it had more than half an hour. Soon, it would take days, then months, then years. Then it would reach the point where Richmond would be like Mephisto, unable to damage Nakayu at all and unable to be killed by him either. Richmond felt cold sweat down his back as he dreaded the day he would be bullied. The reason why most of the hidden powers even hid so deeply was to avoid this maniac. F.U.C.K. Boy Richmond, what do you think you're doing? I said we'd fight 300 rounds. That was only half a round. Richmond ignored him before taking out his pipe and returning to his previous relaxation spot. Nakayu, however, refused to give up and kept pestering Richmond for hours on end. Draco sneezed suddenly. Was someone talking about him somewhere? He wasn't that notable in this timeline though. Maybe another side effect of his elimination of Ratchet. Right now, he was in a zonal area called the Ancient Caves. It was a level 10 to 15 area for 4-man parties to grind. Being the first here, Draco naturally had access to all the hidden chests and resources in the area, as long as he could find them. He wasn't worried about that, as his second point of focus outside the war of attrition was to gain a solid foundation for his future guild. One thing a guild needed desperately? A strong leader. Well, that and access to rare resources. In these caves were a pathway to achieving both. After all, even though Draco was trying to make a quick buck from the war, he still wasn't willing to neglect his own leveling. As for his trade skill levels, they had gone up impressively after all the forging and potion making he did. Level 8. EXP 32%. STR 4. Dex 10. End 8. Int 10. SPR 5. Cha 5. LCK 5. Combat skills, Absolute Void, Revenger, Cloud Feed. Trade skills, Smithing, Level 4, 67%, Alchemy, Level 3, 42%, Enchanting, Level 2, 12%. So far, he had 2 more levels to go, meaning he would only earn a total of 10 points. With those 10 distributed after allocation, he would hit the same ceiling he had in his previous life. That was, if he didn't factor in Richmond's first gift. Draco took out a vial of bright gold liquid that seemed to attract light into its depths. Such a small thing, yet so valuable. Draco wasn't lying when he told Richmond that many would fight over just this. Ability potion, consumable. Rank, legendary. Effect, grants an ability point in any one field. It may seem like such a small thing, but a consumable that could directly increase attributes permanently was godly in the later stages. Since current players were abhorrently weak, it was the topmost existences who would fight for this item. Draco shuddered when he remembered what happened to the player who received this from Richmond in his past life. Since it had been the early stage, he decided to sell rather than consume. The moment he showed it to an NPC merchant, he had started a chain of events that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Draco immediately consumed it. The moment it hit his tongue, he felt like he had kissed the most beautiful angel in existence. Draco couldn't help but m.o.a.n slightly when it moved down his throat and into his stomach. It felt like a gentle and loving wife massaging every part of your body while staring at you with utmost adoration. When it came to an end, Draco mentally decided to have his strength upped by 1 point. The moment he did, he felt the energy released from the concoction enter his body and refine it directly. Just like that, he was on the path to perfection. Next came something Draco had held off with great struggle, even with his indomitable will. He reached into his inventory and pulled out the legendary treasure chest. The moment he did, the blinding glow of the chest filled the tunnel he was in. Draco had eyes for nothing other than the chest in his hand. The same way those boys stared at Zane in the native's hamlet was the look he directed onto this poor container. If it had sentience, it would have called for help. That was because Draco was drooling with a semi-dazed expression. This was a legendary treasure chest. He had a whole 30% chance to get a legendary item. Something he never got even after 15 years of playing as a top-rank existence. Without further ado, Draco opened the chest. The glow suddenly lit up the cavern and enveloped it. A pillar of golden light shot out of the ancient caves towards the sky, parting the clouds and breaching the atmospherical limit. Every monster, player, and NPC within 100,000 kilometers noticed what was going on. Some were scared, some were enthralled and some were aroused. Those who fell in the latter category didn't stop to admire the light show because they knew what it meant. Someone was opening a legendary treasure chest. Normally, They wouldn't dare dream of accosting someone who had the strength to acquire one, but the fact that the owner opened it at such an obscure location meant one thing. They were fearful that someone would snatch their bounty. Naturally, that meant they weren't confident that they had the power to protect it. As long as they could get there before the others and steal it, they didn't want to think further. Various streams of light could be seen heading towards the golden pillar, while some shadows darted on the ground at speeds that would frighten Barry Allen. Draco, who was the cause of all this, cursed. Naturally, he had never opened a legendary treasure chest before, so he had no idea it would have this effect. He had opened countless epic treasure chests and knew that a light show would occur, hence he chose the derelict ancient caves to open it. At most, it should have lit up the whole cave, not the whole horizon. Then again, his heart was pounding with anticipation. Part of him, specifically the analytical part, reconciled itself with that fact that he would probably be getting an epic item. After all, he had but a 30% chance of gaining a legendary item. Even after that, whether he could leave here alive with it was in question. But still, even knowing that, his heart thumped wildly. Suddenly, a blinding glow more intense than what was being displayed outside penetrated his eyelids, but didn't cause him discomfort. When the light eventually receded, he saw something that made his mind tremble. Congratulations on opening, legendary treasure chest. Reward: Dragon Soul. A small golden dragon flapped its wings as it stared at Draco coldly. Suddenly, Draco felt the weight of the world drop atop his shoulders and his motions ceased. He knew what this was: sacred force. That meant that this tiny soul belonged to a divine being. After coldly appraising Draco, the dragon snorted and flew into his forehead. Immediately, a terrible pain assaulted him as the dragon ruffled through his memories, both of his actions in Boundless and in his measly 21 years of life in the real world. For some reason, his memories of the future went undetected from the invader. After carefully analyzing Draco, the tiny soul smiled unkindly. It breathed out and Draco felt like a surgeon had opened his skull, pouring acid into his cranium. Due to the sacred force, he couldn't even move. He could only endure in total silence as waves of agony burned through him. In such a state, it was impossible to measure time. To Draco, the seconds stretched into days and the days into years. After what felt like 1,000 lifetimes, the pain finally receded and the sacred force withdrew into his body, but not completely. An abysmally small amount of it merged into his aura, giving him an intense bearing that most mortals couldn't face. People who looked at Draco would forever feel apprehensive, as of staring at a slumbering dragon. They would do everything to stay out of his way, unless they were significantly stronger than him. Just when Draco was about to question what the hell happened, a screen popped up before him. Dragon Soul, Fusion Item. Effects. Passive 1, Sacred Force. Trace amounts of sacred force leaks out of the user, acting as a deterrent to monsters, NPCs, and players at the user's level and below. Passive 2, Dragon Legacy. Possessing a small part of the soul of a divine dragon, the user's power is magnified permanently by a factor of 10. Active 1, Dragon's Force. Activating this skill gives the user a boost of power by a factor of 700% for 30 seconds. Cooldown, 12 hours. Further abilities can only be unlocked by attaining a higher class tier. Draco started hyperventilating. This was too much. He hadn't noticed it, but he truly felt more resting and explosive power than before. Describing it as a 10x increase seemed accurate to Draco, as he felt like he could crush 10 of himself at the same level without breaking a sweat. And then there was the Berserk. Draco realized that this wasn't the time to celebrate. Despite his massive power boost, he was still a weakling at rank 0. Not even counting rank 1 foes, some of those speeding here might be rank 2 and above. He couldn't fight such people even with 100 of his current self. For now he could only flee. Draco pulled out a town portal scroll and activated it. The channeling time was 30 seconds with such a basic scroll, and Draco cursed. The moment he hit rank 1 and got access to the cities, he would embark on a quest that would grant him a more convenient mode of transportation. Till then, however, he could only make do with this flimsy scroll. As the seconds ticked away, he could see beams of light converging on his area. In less than 10 seconds, the fastest of them would arrive. Meanwhile, he had 15 seconds to go on the scroll. Draco could only watch as the first to arrive darted towards him with a cold glint in his eye. "Brat, it is your own misfortune for opening such a bounty here. Die knowing you died at the hands of the greatest thief, Fleetfoot." With those bold words came the gleam of a dagger's blade as it plunged towards Draco's jugular. Draco closed his eyes and swore internally. He should have blinked first before using the scroll, but his panic made him mix it up. Even if it wouldn't save him, it would have bought him the seconds he need to escape. Now, even if he managed to flee, there was someone who saw his face. He could easily spread information about him and all the hidden powers would come after him. Not even Richmond could protect him from that fate. He would end up just like that guy from his past life who had his account crippled. However, something that shocked both parties occurred. The dragon that was relaxing in Draco's soul opened its eyes and flew out. With a look of disdain, it simply breathed out an ethereal white flame that engulfed Fleetfoot. The thief's screams echoed around the cave and even outside it, causing all those speeding over to pause as goosebumps popped up on their skins from the sound. Someone was being horrifically tortured in there. Whether it was the holder of the treasure or someone like them who wanted to steal it, they couldn't tell. What they did know was that if they entered, there was a chance they would experience that too. It was that fatal pause that gave Draco enough time to disappear. When those who came to rob him overcame their terror, they bolted into the caverns and swore. If only they hadn't stopped. Suddenly, intense pressure fell on them as they felt the mental presence of a hidden power. "Ants under my foot, where is the holder of the treasure?" One of the men who managed to speak under the intense force ground out a few words. "Se Senior, he es escaped." "Oh? Is that so? Then you all don't need to live anymore," the voice casually spoke as they all burst into blood mist that dispersed into the wind. "It seems I have to come out of hiding for this one." With the recession of the voice, the area relaxed and the signs of the slaughter passed away. Chapter 10, Nightingale's Cry. Draco coalesced in stagnant Mosstown with a haggard expression. He had gone through quite the harrowing experience just then. From high to low, then high to low again, before finally experiencing a high. For him, it was the mental equivalent of running a few laps around Sturgehaven Kingdom. Draco felt that a breather was in order. With that in mind, the best way to unwind would be a dungeon run. Around stagnant Mosstown were 3 low-level dungeons that players could enter in 4-man parties to clear. There were also a couple of 10-man party dungeons and one single 20-man dungeon called Riverside Barrow. Draco first checked the leaderboards for Sturgehaven Kingdom. First, Riveting Night, Level 4. Second, Sublime Notion, Level 3. Third, Dark Night, Level 3. Fourth, Rambunctious Butt Lover, Level 2. Fifth, Dreary Traveler, Level 2. He only had eyes for the first 5, as they'd set the average for the current level standard. Draco was shocked to find that Riveting Night had already reached Level 4. She must have had her own special encounters to climb that high. Draco had no idea that such encounters were born from Riveting Night trailing him. Currently, she was taking part of the war of attrition along with Sublime Notion. If Draco knew this, he might spit blood and die. Rambunctious represented the proper standard that Draco expected. After all, it hadn't been a full day since Boundless launched. Draco was just abusing his knowledge as a reincarnator to gain benefits before the timeline deviated too far from what he knew. Even then, Rambunctious was a top expert to reach Level 2 so quickly. Draco knew everyone in the top 5 except number 3, who made him wary. No such name had popped up during his past life, meaning that the timeline deviation had already begun. Who was this Dark Knight? For a second, Draco wondered if he also reincarnated. He wasn't naive to think that he was the protagonist of the universe. There was nothing stopping others from crossing time. After all, he didn't even know how he'd done it either. Draco noticed that stagnant Mosstown was less crowded than it had been when the players ported in. Probably most of them had gone to level up in zonal areas or clear dungeons. The few who remained were those who targeted trade skill classes such as merchants, advisors, smiths, etc. Sighing, Draco blinked and appeared a few meters from the nearest four-man party dungeon. None of the people there even noticed his appearance due to the spot he chose. The dungeon he was at was called Nightingale's Cry. It was a forest dungeon, the spooky kind. Thrust into perpetual darkness, the monsters within were of the undead variety. Draco chose this dungeon because of his Lightbringer title, which gave him an insane advantage over evil-aligned beings. Coupled with every boon he had acquired so far, including his high level, he could solo this dungeon on survival mode for a whole day. There were different ways to tackle dungeons in Boundless, 3 types to be exact. A player could choose the traditional way and enter with a party to clear out the dungeon by defeating the boss and claiming the treasure chest. The neo-modern way was to clear by checkpoints. The dungeon would be split into sections with many bosses at each point. Defeating them allowed the party to exit and come another time to continue on the next part. The rewards were much less valuable in this situation until the final boss was defeated, but the difficulty in clearing each section was higher than fighting the boss in the traditional path. The third and most revered way was the survival mode. That one was simple: you enter the dungeon and fight till you drop. Monsters kept respawning in set intervals, including bosses. For this mode, rewards were doled out according to the length of time you kept fighting and the quality of enemies you killed. If you spent your time chasing after minions while avoiding bosses, you might survive longer but will end up with much less at the end than someone who fought difficult monsters for half the time. Of course, the player perception towards each type was different. Completing the first was basic and most guilds were expected to do so. Standards for guilds were set based on the latter 2 categories, however. The checkpoint a guild reached in the neo-modern mode and the amount of time spent as well as the quality of monsters killed in the survival mode was the line that separated guilds and created popularity as well as recruitment interest. Right now, guilds were inaccessible, so obviously, no one yet bothered with the latter 2 categories, opting to clear the basic version first. Draco noticed that the area was filled with players in parties or those who were looking for parties. Looking for a healer. Minimum level must be 1 and must have a basic package. Noobs go die. We only want those who are level 1 and can tank like a rhino. Damage dealing mage looking for team. Swordsman with agility focus looking for a team with a tank. Minimum levels must be 1. You can't afford me easily. Different calls were made by different parties and Draco found them amusing. The arrogance of noobs would always be refreshing to seasoned experts. It was the same as being an adu.l.t where a child claimed they could lift a heavier weight than you. Draco didn't bother to join any party. He simply walked into the portal leading to the dungeon while selecting survival mode. He was in it for the long haul this time. He had no intention to leave until his stress was beaten away. No one noticed him enter, even those with their eyes on the portal. Draco's in-game speed had reached the level where mere walking was the same as using the venerated Shunpo skill. Upon entry, Draco was brought into a dead forest that had an eerie atmosphere. There was no ambience, as the forest was dead silent. This usually meant 2 things. 1 was that there was a predator around. 2 was that literally everything that could make a sound was dead. In this case, it was the latter. Scree! A screech came from Draco's right as a ghoul came sprinting with claws outstretched. Name: Ghoul, private rank monster. Level: 5. HP: 250/250. Draco's brows furrowed. A simple cannon fodder monster had such a high amount of HP? Of course, the reason why players could even enter at this stage was that monsters were scaled by level according to the party members' strengths. Hence, level 1 and 2 players could still tackle a dungeon like this. Draco was level 8, so he didn't expect them to be weak, but not this strong either. It was simple enough for him to sidestep the ghoul's grapple and leave 2 sword lines on its body, bottoming out its HP. Draco didn't receive any EXP or drops, as those would be calculated after he was defeated. This ghoul was soon followed by a group of his kin. Draco backtracked and took stock of their number. Almost 20 of them were zombie running towards him with arms outstretched and claws glistening with undeath. Since the class he was aiming for had very little ranged capabilities, he would have waded into his enemies in order to defeat them. Some would find it daunting, not because of the high combat capability requirements, but the presence of what would make even the most avid horror fan tremble. Still, these monsters were bottom tier and it took Draco very little time to dispatch them. All he had to do was leap into the air and land on one of the ghouls with Durandal cleaving it in half. Draco wasn't going to bother with activating Absolute Void for this. Instead, he showcased Wuxia-tier swordsmanship as he weaved into his enemies and separated their heads from their bodies. Of course, undead could function with appendages detached, but Boundless was a game that had rules. The damage Draco dealt was enough to bottom out their HP, so they were unable to rise again. Draco smirked at this development. By the 4th update, such game-like logic would be taken out and what should have happened will occur. Still, he would take what he got with a smile. He wasn't a battle maniac who wanted a glory-filled battle. Heck, if it would have worked, Draco would have tossed sand into the undead's eyes. There was no such thing as fairness in this world or the real one. Soon Draco's headcount of ghouls began to rise rapidly as their numbers saturated at an astonishing rate. It reached a point where Draco had to leap around like a frog and decapitate enemies through acrobatics rather than stay on the ground. Eventually, the first round came to an end and he got a 5-second buffer. Draco hadn't lost even a lick of HP, so he used that time to stretch and make himself more limber. Back in the battle, he felt a few joints lock up every now and then, which was uncomfortable and painful. The second round began with a new type of monster mixed with the old. The number of ghouls weren't as concentrated as before, due to the presence of a new ghost-like entity with sharp claws and blood-red eyes. Name: Wraith, Specialist rank monster. Level: 6. HP: 1000/1000. Draco frowned seriously. He wasn't worried about the Wraithkin, but rather their high HP. It was comparable to a sergeant rank monster, not a mere specialist like what was before him. If another player heard Draco describe the difficult to defeat specialist monsters as mere, they would mob him. The skill required to solo a specialist was more than an average pro player could put out. At most, it would take a 4-man party of semi-pros to handle one, much less the amount arrayed before Draco. After all, the AI factored in levels, but not the amount of players. Most would enter the survival mode with at least a 20-man squad of elites. Draco, however, was soloing it, so he would have to face the same type of difficulty such a team would battle at his level. If Draco had not killed Ratchet and entered the survival mode, he would have had to put in maximum effort to survive a couple of rounds. However, with the Lightbringer title, Richmond's heraldry items, the dragon soul and his stats, he was akin to a wolf that was in a forest full of sheep. He was the hunter, the killer. They were the prey, the victims. He wasn't locked in here with them, they were locked in here with him. Draco began a massacre that would have the Lich King of Boundless feel a twinge of apprehension. He moved so quickly that even an expert player would not be able to follow him, much less these private and specialist rank monsters. The Wraiths had the power in intangibility, which negated physical damage totally for lower tier weapons. Since both Excalibur and Durandal were rare swords with the passive Revenger skill giving Draco magical damage, he was able to hit them. Even with the highly reduced damage, his Lightbringer title managed to offset it a little, so he couldn't insta-kill them. But it didn't take more than a few hits to render them into cube-like pixels. The important part about Lightbringer wasn't its offense, but the defense. Draco was confident that he could stand there and give the ghouls an hour to damage him. They would only be able to reduce his health by a percentage by then. The only reason he exerted himself to dodge was the flawless accolade, which would give him a nice reward as well as to hone himself. Draco knew he was unparalleled in this timeline due to his skill, but that was on the condition that he had his old body. His current self was like a boy toy, too soft and mellow. If it weren't for his overwhelming ability, he wouldn't be able to keep up. With such an intense battle that required him to remain untouched in a congested area of enemies that focused on melee, he was getting a workout and more. Soon enough, round 2 came to an end. Draco once again spent the interval stretching. He wanted to maximize his gains, so he tried to loosen up his muscles again. After all, the last thing he wanted was to cramp while performing acrobatics. Round 3 began with only specialist wraiths populating the field. Not a single ghoul could be seen milling around. This actually eased things up on Draco, as the ghouls were the main headache due to their overwhelming numbers and single-mindedness. Draco waved Durandal and Excalibur in an awe-inspiring way, leaving only faint after-images of their movement. In fact, it looked more like he was waving a blue and golden streak of light. The sky was dotted with rising damage indicators as Draco pulverized the opposition. To an onlooker, it would seem like a bunch of urchins trying to fight a heavyweight bodybuilder. The third round came to an end much quicker than the first two. Draco could slightly feel that his skill was being polished. His current body was slowly merging with his level of skill, but on a technical level. To truly reach that level, Draco would need to build muscle memory and muscle. Still, he was greatly satisfied with his progress so far. He didn't bother to warm up for the next round as he had already jolted all his muscles into action. The fourth round came with very little fanfare. In fact, there wasn't any noticeable enemy in sight. And yet, Draco's expression became grim as his hands tightly clenched the hilt of his swords. A terrifying aura was being emitted from all around him, pressuring and enclosing upon his body. It felt like diving into the deep sea. The further down you went, the more pressure exerted on your body. And yet, the cause had not even made itself truly known. Suddenly, a rumbling sound echoed in the forest as the ground began to quake violently. Draco found that he could barely remain upright with all the shaking. It was like standing at the epicenter of a magnitude 8 earthquake. Draco's apprehension soon turned to surprise, then shock, as a creamy white skeletal hand burst out from the earth. It was soon followed by another hand, then a head, a torso, then legs. All in all, a 9-foot-tall bone golem was standing before Draco. It looked like the skeletal frame of a giant, which had some muscles still attached to its joints. It was definitely a bizarre and freaky sight to behold. Damn. That was all Draco could mutter in the face of this monstrosity. Soon, the monster turned to stare at him with its empty eye sockets and semi-unhinged jaw. After a minute, it roared in a bone-chilling voice as it raised its hands up. They came down in the form of an axe, crashing into the area Draco stood. That zone became a crater as the earth buckled from the sheer force of the bone golem's attack. Name: Bone Shaker, Sergeant rank monster. Level: 9. HP: 3500/3500. This monster was definitely not going to be a walk in the park like the ones before it. After all, Sergeant rank monsters were party tier boss monsters. A minimum 4-man party of equal or higher levels would be needed just to contend against it, much less obtain victory. On top of that, the monster was one whole level above Draco. Despite landing an area-destroying hit on Draco, the bone golem let out an earth-shattering roar. The simple reason for that was its target. Instead of becoming meat paste under its hands, Draco was standing atop them with his arms folded and a C.O.C.Ky smirk on his lips. Pointing to the golem, Draco provoked it further. Haha. What a loser. You should go home and drink milk to buff up your calcium, bonehead. Maybe then you might be able to hit my shadow. A roar of anger as well as hatred was Draco's answer as the bone golem quickly brought its hands up in order to upend Draco and send him airborne. From there, the bone golem would show him who needed calcium after it crushed his bones and slurped on his marrow. Still, the bone golem realized that its hated enemy wasn't airborne at all. Unfortunately for it, Draco was seated on its shoulders and calmly staring at it with a mocking expression. This made the monster almost go mad. Swiftly, its hand broke the sound barrier as it slammed onto its shoulder at a horrifying speed. Yet still, Draco wasn't under its palm, but rather on its other shoulder. I'm a bit overpowered now. Sigh. Anyone who's spectating my match would be bored to death from the lack of real danger. Had any player of Boundless listened to Draco's thoughts, they'd be spitting fire. Who cared if spectators were bored? With your ability, you could solo guild dungeons, yet here you are toying with a sergeant. A sergeant? This was a monster that only a 4-man party of top-tier experts who possessed flawless teamwork would be able to kill. Typical parties that are formed in a rush wouldn't be able to contend even if they had normal pros, unless those pros possessed godlike skill or a trump card with overwhelming power. And yet, Draco was treating it like a little brother trying to attack his big brother in a tantrum. The bone golem, despite its anger, felt apprehension. Each tier of monster possessed more intelligence than the previous one. As such, the bone golem came to realize how Draco managed to avoid its strikes that were filled with raw speed and power. It was simple. Draco was simply faster than it was. Such a thing was hard for the bone golem to comprehend. Normally, it would be fighting against a 20-man team of immortal adventurers who it would give a tough time before being defeated. Yet, a single human adventurer was sitting atop its shoulder like it was a prime relaxation spot. Draco was having a field day. He hadn't felt the need to go all out against the ghouls and wraiths, but this bone golem certainly forced him to be quick on his toes. And quick he was. With all of his boons stacking on top of each other, Draco was invincible to anyone within his tier. He couldn't wait to reach level 10 and gain the Avenger class. As a rank 1 player, he would have access to various facilities and locations which would allow him to step into phase 2 of his early game plan. With a chuckle, Draco decided to stop playing with his food and performed a flip. Landing perfectly, he finally unsheathed his blades and pointed Durandal at the bone golem. Bring it on, bonehead. Part 1 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.